Baik, selamat siang para hadirin. Selamat datang. Selamat datang di acara seminar siang hari ini. Perkenalkan, nama saya Lia Latifah. Saya yang akan memandu acara seminar yang diadakan oleh Ethics and Compliance Committee IPA. Sebelumnya, kami ingin mengajak para hadirin untuk ikut melengkapi survei AML questionnaire form yang sudah pernah dibagikan oleh panitia, ataupun juga bisa diakses melalui chat box. Akan kami sediakan link untuk ke survei AML questionnaire agar para peserta bisa turut serta mengisi kuesioner tersebut yang mana informasinya akan sangat-sangat bermanfaat untuk acara hari ini. Sambil menunggu, izinkan saya untuk sedikit memberikan latar belakang tentang Ethics and Compliance Committee. Sebelumnya dikenal sebagai Compliance Exchange Knowledge Forum atau CKEF yang dibentuk di tahun 2017. Yang kemudian di tahun yang dibentuk di tahun 2013 oleh beberapa PSC yang memiliki common goals dalam hal managing business risks in corruption. Kemudian di tahun 2017, CKEF menerima approval dari Board of IPA untuk pembentukan Compliance Committee dalam IPA yang kemudian dikenal sebagai Ethics and Compliance Committee atau ECC. Berbagai rangkaian kegiatan, work program diluncurkan dan diadakan oleh ECC, termasuk diantaranya di awal tahun 2018 meluncurkan 2018 Corruption Perception Index. Di tahun 2019 pun mengadakan banyak rangkaian acara, termasuk Annual Gathering Event Compliance Clinic di bulan Oktober 2019. Hari ini ECC kembali mengadakan pertemuan seminar online dengan tema Anti-Money Laundering Trends and Challenges yang merupakan kolaborasi antara ECC dengan United Nations Offices on Drugs and Crimes atau UNODC, menghadirkan Ibu Zulda Anderton sebagai Deputy Country Manager on Anti-Money Laundering, didampingi juga oleh Ibu Putri Wijaya selaku National Anti-Corruption Coordinator for UNODC Indonesia. Kami juga menghadirkan keynote speakers dari Hogan Lovells, Dewi Nagara Fahri and Partners atau DNFP Law Firm, menghadirkan Bapak Khalid Haidir selaku Managing Partner dan Bapak Teguh Darmawan selaku Senior Associate. Para hadirin, sebagai momentum pembukaan acara seminar Anti-Money Laundering Trend and Challenges hari ini, bersama-sama kita akan mendengar kalimat pembuka yang akan disampaikan oleh IPA Executive Director dan juga Ethics Compliance Committee IPA Chairman. Bersama ini untuk mengawali pembukaan seminar, maka kami ingin mengundang Ibu Mariolin Wayong atau Ibu Meiti untuk menyampaikan kata pembukanya. Kami persilahkan. Ibu Meiti.
Terima kasih, Lia. Bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu, terima kasih untuk kehadirannya, partisipasinya pada acara yang diadakan oleh Etik dan Compliance Committee-nya IPA pada siang hari ini, ya, yang akan mendiskusikan tentang anti-money laundering trend and challenges. Tentunya, special thanks kami berikan kepada 3 narasumber kita, Ibu Zulda Anderton, Bapak Khalid Haidir, dan juga Pak Teguh Darmawan. Seiring dengan menurunnya pandemi di negara kita udah kembali aktif. Nah, saya ucapkan terima kasih juga kepada Komite ECC yang mengadakan acara ini. Ya. Nah, saya senang bahwa kita bisa membawakan topik ini. Akhir-akhir ini kita banyak mendengar tentang money laundering. Ya. Nah, pada siang hari ini dari ketiga narasumber maupun diskusi kita, saya harapkan kita bisa mendapat pengertian yang benar tentang money laundering ini, baik secara umum dalam kehidupan kita, keseharian kita, tetapi juga terutama untuk bisnis kita. di oil and gas. Dengan demikian saya harapkan kita bisa menghindari ini terjadi ya, baik secara pribadi maupun di dalam bisnis kita. Jadi ini menarik sekali ya, be aktif, nanti mau nanya apa aja silahkan, ini kesempatan yang baik untuk kita semua yang hadir di sini. Ya, itu aja dari saya dan selamat berdiskusi ya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak Ibu Meti atas kalimat pengantarnya untuk acara hari ini. Selanjutnya kami ingin mengundang Bapak Roni Siaan selaku ECC IPA, Chairman IPA. Kami persilahkan Pak Roni.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Lia. Good afternoon, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Terima kasih banyak sudah meluangkan waktu berharga dari Bapak dan Ibu yang hadir pada saat ini untuk kembali menghadiri webinar yang diselenggarakan oleh IPA Ethics and Compliance Committee. Ini menjadi kesempatan yang membuat kami bersyukur karena dalam masa-masa pandemik kita masih bisa menyelenggarakan event yang tentunya nanti diharapkan akan membekali kita semua dengan pengetahuan dan juga praktis yang berguna tentunya untuk kita sama-sama mendorong industri oil and gas khususnya dan sesuai dengan ethics and compliance missions untuk membangun integrity cultures ya yang ada di industri. Nah, saya ingin menyampaikan bahwa apa yang kita lakukan sesi siang dan sore nanti ini merupakan bagian dari program Ethics and Compliance Committee dalam bentuk authority engagement, stakeholder engagement, termasuk juga best practice sharing dan knowledge sharing yang sekarang kita selenggarakan dan kita akan dengarkan langsung dari narasumber kita. Dan sebelum kita mulai, saya ingin menyampaikan sekali lagi terima kasih kami, apresiasi yang tinggi, khususnya Ibu Zilda Anderton, Ibu Putri Rahayu dari UNODC dan juga Pak Khalid Haider dan juga Pak Teguh Darmawan dari NFP yang akan membagikan beberapa materi dengan kita dan saya juga sangat berharap seperti disampaikan oleh Ibu Meti kita mengutilize sesi yang baik ini untuk langsung berinteraksi dengan distinguished speaker yang sudah hadir bersama dengan kita. Selamat mengikuti seluruh rangkaian acara. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Roni atas kata pengantar dan kalimat pembukaannya untuk acara hari ini. Sebelumnya para hadirin, perkenankan saya untuk sedikit membawakan tata tertib seminar online hari ini. Selama seminar berlangsung, kami mohon para hadirin, para peserta seminar untuk mematikan mikrofonnya dan kami menyarankan dan mengajak para hadirin untuk membuka kamera. Mikrofon dapat diaktifkan pada saat sesi tanya-jawab yang waktunya akan kami sediakan di setiap akhir di setiap akhir paparan atau presentasi. Para hadirin, para peserta, kami mohon untuk dapat menggunakan nama tampilan dengan format nama lengkap _ nama perusahaan. Seminar ini akan dibawakan secara bilingual. Beberapa paparan di sesi pertama dan kedua dan juga panel diskusi akan menggunakan dalam bahasa Inggris maupun bahasa Indonesia. Khususnya dalam sesi Q&A, kita dapat melakukannya dengan bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris. Dengan agenda untuk seminar hari ini, kita akan memulai dengan sesi pertama, yaitu paparan atau presentasi yang akan dibawakan oleh UNODC tentang Anti-Money Laundering Trends and Challenges. Kemudian dilanjutkan dengan sesi kedua, paparan atau presentation yang akan dibawakan oleh Hogan Lovells DNFP Law Firm tentang Exposure to the Risk of Money Laundering in the procurement process in the upstream oil and gas industry. Sekali lagi, di setiap akhir paparan, kami akan menyediakan waktu untuk sesi tanya-jawab sebagai bentuk interaksi antara keynote speakers dengan para peserta. Setelah sesi kedua ini, kita akan rehat sejenak selama 5 menit. Setelah itu, kita akan melakukan interaksi kuis yang menarik, di mana para peserta dapat berpartisipasi. Untuk pemenang kuis telah disediakan token-token yang menarik dari panitia. Kemudian setelah interaksi kuis, kita akan mengadakan panel discussion yang akan dipandu oleh moderator dan juga para keynote speakers. Baik, sudah tiba saatnya kita untuk memulai dengan sesi pertama. Kita akan mendengar presentation atau paparan tentang Anti-Money Laundering Trend and Challenges yang akan dibawakan oleh Ibu Zwelda Anderton selaku Deputy Country Manager on Anti-Money Laundering, didampingi juga oleh Ibu Putri Rahayu selaku National Anti-Corruption Coordinator for UNODC Indonesia. Bersama ini, dengan ini kami persilahkan Ibu Zwelda untuk membawakan presentasinya. This presentation will be conveyed in English, although, however, in the Q&A session, you are encouraged to join in the Q&A, either in Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa Inggris. Silakan Ibu Zwelda.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Selamat siang, rekan-rekan semua. Yang saya hormati, Ibu Majalin Wajong, IPA Executive Director, Bapak Roni Siahan, the ECC IPA Chairman, my fellow speakers, Bapak Khalid Haidar, Bapak Teguh Darmawan, Ibu Dewi Negara Fakhri, dan kolega saya dari UNODC, Ibu Putri Wijayanti, our resident coordinator and expert on anti-corruption. Pertama-tama, terima kasih atas undangannya hari ini untuk memberi paparan anti pencucian uang. Mohon maaf sebelumnya apabila suara saya agak falter sedikit, saya akan berusaha sebaik mungkin. Izin saya akan teruskan dalam bahasa Inggris. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Zwelda Anderton and I do serve as the Deputy Country Manager for the UNODC in Indonesia. And I also serve a dual role, and that is as the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism advisor for the UNODC to Indonesia. So it is a great pleasure for me to be here today to contribute to the sharing of information and knowledge building on anti-money laundering within the oil and gas industry. With that, I will begin my presentation. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So to begin with, what is money laundering? Money laundering, by definition, is the processing of criminal proceeds to disguise their illegal origin. So in Bahasa Indonesia, I will try, pencucian uang adalah proses untuk menyamarkan penghasilan asal ilegal oleh para kriminal. This is the definition set by global organizations such as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, and the Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF. The FATF. What does it mean? Apa artinya dari definisi ini? We can understand that like any business, criminals conduct their illegal business and acts to generate a profit. Economic gain, profitability, is the driving factor behind their illegal activities, which can include the manufacturing and selling of drugs, trafficking in humans, tax crimes, hiding financial gains derived from corruption, and from crimes against the environment. Once criminals make their profit from illegal activities, they then, of course, want to enjoy those profits from their ill-gotten gains. To enjoy the profits from their criminal acts, criminals will seek to legitimize the proceeds of crime through a process of money laundering, or the washing of dirty money in colloquial terms. So kriminal termotivasi oleh profit atau hasil financial dari kejahatannya. Untuk menikmati penghasilan gelapnya, para kriminal akan mencoba untuk membuat penghasilan itu terlihat seperti penghasilan legitimate atau penghasilan bersih. Para kriminal memakai berbagai cara untuk menyamarkan penghasilan mereka. So there are a number of ways in which criminals can launder their money from crimes, including through a series of complex transfers through the formal banking system, use of shell companies, over or under invoicing through trade-based money laundering, and tax avoidance. Despite the process used for laundering the proceeds of crime, there are generally 3 stages that comprise money laundering. Next slide, please. Here are the 3 stages of money laundering shown in the diagram. Ini adalah 3 tahap dari pencucian uang yang digunakan oleh kriminal. The first involves the placement of the dirty money gained from criminal activities into the formal financial sector. This can be in the form of paying invoices for a seemingly legitimate company, a shell company, or a front company. It is the point where dirty money is placed and entered into the formal financial system. The second involves layering, which is intended to disguise the origin of the money placed in the formal financial system. It usually consists of wire transfers between accounts, banks, and foreign banks. It is moving the money further away from its illegitimate source. In effect, the washing phase that moves the money farther and farther away from its origin. And once the traces of the illegal activities associated with the money have been adequately disguised, it can then be integrated as clean money and as part of the formal economy. This newly clean money is now profit that can be enjoyed by the criminal via bank withdrawal or business profits of its shell or front companies. This is the integration of dirty money into the clean financial system. You can see here, integration is usually enjoyed in the form of an expensive sports car. Typically, it is also enjoyed through real estate, precious metals and gems, and other forms. Jadi, tahap pertama adalah placement atau penempatan uang kotor pada sistem finansial. Tahap kedua adalah layering atau pelapisan, di mana uang kotor yang sekarang sudah dimasukkan ke sektor finansial formal diputar melalui beberapa transfer antara bank, antara negara, untuk menyamarkan asal dari uang itu. Dan apabila sudah disamarkan, tahap terakhir adalah integration atau integrasi, di mana uang kotor sudah dicuci dan menjadi bagian dari sistem finansial yang siap untuk dipakai dan dinikmati oleh kriminal. Let's now move into having a closer look into the impacts of money laundering in the broader context. Why is it important to combat money laundering? How is it relevant to our work, to your work? So here I've listed as a guide some of the money laundering sort of impacts on the economy, on politics, and on society. Money laundering statistics from the UNODC estimates that between 2 to 5% of the world's GDP is laundered every year. That is approximately $800 billion US dollars to $2 trillion US dollars a year. And of that money that is laundered, approximately 280 billion US dollars is comprised from crimes to the environment. That can include illegal logging, wildlife trafficking, and crimes within the extractive industry. This estimate is based on what is known or has been detected and identified to be illegal financial flows. Because money laundering involves disguising financial flows and origin of ill-gotten gains, it is difficult to estimate the exact amount of money that is actually laundered from predicate offenses. Money laundering threatens the credibility of international financial institutions. It undermines the financial system, and all of the countries integrated into the international financial system become exposed to the risk. Money laundering damages financial sector institutions that are critical for economic growth, promoting crime and corruption that slow economic growth. It reduces efficiency in the real sector of the economy. Damage to the financial sector as a result of financially motivated crimes affects the integrity of the overall financial system. When the integrity of the financial system is damaged, it affects the confidence of legitimate actors such as investors. A damaged financial sector or a financial system that does not have integrity will not attract foreign direct investment into a country. It will drive up the cost of doing business for banks and other businesses that will deter them from operating within that country. In economies where there are limited regulations on money laundering, where banking secrecy is likely to be strictly enforced, the ratio of the informal economy to the national economy is high. Cash inflows and outflows are easily exploited by money launderers. Rapid and uncontrolled inflow of proceeds of crime into a country with weak or limited AML regulations. A high rate of luxury consumption, such as in luxury cars and real estate, as well as significant increases in exports, imports, foreign payments, deficit, inflation, interest, and unemployment rates can signal the unstable demands for money caused by illicit financial flows. In this case, the informal economy places false signs of growth within the formal economy, negatively affecting the monetary and economic policies. Use of shell companies and front companies to hide the key players and sources of illicit financial flows or dirty money that is pushed through the private sector is more prominent in some industries than others.
Sorry, Bu, as well. Your audio.
Right.
You're okay now.
Thank you. The commingling and laundering of proceeds of crime has the same effect as it has on the formal financial system and economic policy. It drives a false picture of the health or growth of an industry. Loss of revenue. Where money laundering is rife in a financial system, government and the private sector will experience a loss of revenue. For the government, undeclared tax or tax avoidance from companies who are involved in disguising illicit financial flows impacts a country's internal revenue stream. In turn, this can affect development. For the private sector, the commingling of funds through shell or front companies provides a misrepresentation of the strength of a market or industry. The integration of illicit financial flows to be profited by criminals takes away from the actual amount in investment and turnover in a market or industry. Not to forget the social cost of money laundering that has a potential to allow criminals, such as drug traffickers and smugglers, to not only continue their operations, but expand them. In extreme circumstances, rampant money laundering can lead to complete takeover of legitimate governments where alternative or shadow economies become prominent and provide societies with greater stability than the formal economy. With such serious impacts emanating from money laundering, the international community at the global, regional, and member state or national levels continue to take action to protect the integrity of the financial system from financial crime and money laundering. Next slide, please. At the global level, the United Nations have issued international instruments to prevent and combat crimes more effectively. These instruments include commitments to the prevention and combating of money laundering and their predicate crimes, which include corruption, bribery, and a list of other predicate type crimes. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, or UNTOC for short, was adopted in the year 2000 to promote cooperation and prevent and combat transnational organized crime more effectively. This is cross-border crime. 190 parties, member states, are a party to the UNTOC. The UNTOC sets up standards to assist parties in adopting legislation to establish criminal offenses. It also establishes frameworks for mutual legal assistance and extradition and fosters law enforcement cooperation. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption, or UNCAC for short, was negotiated by member states and adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2003 and came into force in 2005. It is the only legally binding international anti-corruption multilateral treaty. The UNCAC directly addresses the prevention and detection of corruption, as well as the return of proceeds derived from corruption. As the guardians of these international instruments, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, plays a vital role in assisting member states in translating their commitments into actions and in providing assistance and support for the implementation of the instruments to help protect countless victims. As such, the UNODC works at the global, regional, and national level with member states like Indonesia, providing partnership, support, and technical assistance programs on money laundering, terrorism financing, and the counter-proliferation financing of weapons of mass destruction and their associated predicate crimes, including the relevant sanctions regimes, namely the UN Security Council Resolution 1267 and 1373, which highlight listing obligations for terrorist groups and entities. The Financial Action Task Force, which serves as the global standard-setting body on anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, provides the best practice standards for countries in combating and preventing money laundering, terrorism financing, and the counter-proliferation financing of weapons of mass destruction. They do this in a number of ways. Through the guidance and standards set by the 40 recommendations, through publications for the private sector, working groups on priority topics, guidance on risk assessments, and through a series of mutual evaluations or peer reviews conducted on countries. The 40 recommendations themselves cover a vast array of best practices related to the application of a risk-based approach to regulation, guidance on national, or standards rather, on national cooperation and coordination, the money laundering offense itself, confiscation, terrorism financing, financial sanctions, customer due diligence, and many other essential components of a money laundering regime or anti-money laundering framework. The FATF is also tasked with assessing compliance with technical compliance and effectiveness reviews that are conducted of countries around the world. Indonesia had its last mutual evaluation in 2018 and will shortly undergo another FATF mutual evaluation for the assessment of its membership to the FATF as well. So this is one of the key tasks of the FATF. The FATF also releases a number of guidance documents, including on the development of national risk assessments, sectoral risk assessments, public-private sector partnerships, and the sharing of information through publications. Most recently, there's a publication on the crimes on environment, as well as private sector guidance on information sharing, with law enforcement, government, and other parties as well. These standards are further reflected through FSRBs, or FATF-style regional bodies that cater to specific regions. So for the Southeast Asia and the Pacific, this would be the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering, or the APG. Excuse me. The APG supports and upholds the FATF standards for its regional members and also works to develop regional-specific assessments and publication in collaboration with members. At the national level, member states implement anti-money laundering legislation and regulation addressing the global and international standards set by the UN and FATF, having regard for the context of their region and their own national landscape. Member states develop national risk assessments in line with the FATF standards to assist the public and private sectors detect and deter money laundering. This includes the identification of reporting entities within the jurisdiction and establishing reporting frameworks. It is important for member states to identify money laundering risks, trends, and threats to their national context in order to avoid the negative impacts to the economy, to security, as well as to the stability of its markets and governance. And in order to align its efforts with anti-money laundering regime to the international standards and best practices set by the FATF and the commitments made at the United Nations. Next slide, please. So the global, regional, and national responses to combating money laundering are informed through the analysis of current and emerging trends involving financial crime through predicate crimes and in the laundering of proceeds of crime or money laundering. Governments, non-government organizations, the private sector, and the public all contribute to the detection, identification, and analysis of current and emerging trends from their relevant sectors. The sharing of these trends with regional and international partners assists in developing the global, regional, and national perspectives on money laundering trends and typologies or methodologies. Over the most recent period, the period immediately prior to and following the global pandemic, the following key trends associated with money laundering have been observed. At the international level, organizations such as the United Nations, UNODC, the FATF, Interpol, and others will publish periodic reports and updates on current and emerging trends that are observed globally. Through the sharing of information and analysis across international organizations and their member states, the following observations have been made. That there has been an increase in transnational crime, such as fraud through electronic means, and cybercrime, which has created new sources of proceeds for money laundering, the use of new technology, and anonymous access to internet-based services, including virtual assets, as well as differing regulations and laws across borders that can create loopholes for criminals to exploit. In relation to COVID-19, there has also been an increase in medicrime and corruption, including through the abuse of government emergency economic relief measures through, for example, financial aid or tax incentives, and relaxed public procurement measures during the pandemic itself. Further information on money laundering trends will be available in publications shared on the UNODC, FATF, and other international organization websites. At the regional level, through the sharing of information through FATF-style regional bodies, such as the APG, the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering, for the Southeast Asia and Pacific region, the following observations have been made for the region. And these are primarily derived from the publications that are shared by the APG. That trade-based money laundering and transfer pricing in Southeast Asia has been on the rise, driven by factors including robust economic growth, weaknesses in the regulatory environment related to corruption issues, and the presence of sophisticated transnational criminal networks. An increase in the use of virtual assets in cyber-related crime to launder the proceeds of those crimes. An increase in the use of the internet for high-tech fraud-related crimes. The use of professional services such as lawyers, notaries, and accountants for the laundering of proceeds of crime. Trade in gems and precious metals to launder proceeds of crime. The commingling of illicit and legitimate financial flows to hide the origin of illicit funds and launder money for criminal networks. An increased association with crimes on the environment, including illegal logging, extraction, and wildlife trafficking. corruption and bribery. And finally, wire transfers and the use of foreign bank accounts or cross-border transfers to launder the proceeds of crime. At the regional level, further sources of information on trends within the region can be located on the internet or on the websites of the APG and other FSRBs around the globe. Further information at the regional level can also be sourced from FIU websites in the region as well. These are the financial intelligence units in Indonesia. That is, of course, PPATK. And you have, the FIUs of Malaysia and the Philippines and other members in the region that you can glean further information from. Now, trends that are identified at the member state or country level are usually contained within national risk assessments, which are updated periodically, as well as sectoral risk assessments conducted by the various anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism regulators and their reporting parties by industry segment. In Indonesia, there are, of course, 6 AML-CFT regulators, some of whom include PPATK, OJK, Bank Indonesia, Bapepti, Ministry of Trade. So trends specific to Indonesia's context and environment are contained within Indonesia's National Risk Assessment, the latest of which was updated in 2021. The National Risk Assessment, or NRA, contains a list of predicate crimes associated with money laundering in order of priority that are identified within the country. These include some of the following findings. Predicate crimes with high money laundering risk include corruption and narcotics. Furthermore, predicate crimes with medium risk are comprised of banking, environmental, forestry, fraud, and taxation crimes. The industrial sector reporting entities that are at high risk of involvement in money laundering are motor vehicle companies and property companies, property agents. Legal entities have a high money laundering risk, while business entities that have high money laundering risk are limited liability companies, or PTs, and government agencies, such as some ministries. Individual job profiles that have a high money laundering risk are legislative and government officials and employees of state-owned or regional government-owned enterprises, including retirees. A risk assessment was conducted based on typologies that have a high level of risk of laundering the proceeds of crime, including the use of false identities, transfer to property assets, and the use of nominees or loan names, smurfing, structuring, use of professional services, use of new payment methods and systems, and use of corporations and utilization of sectors which are not well regulated. The key factor in developing these assessments, especially those that relate to a particular industry, is public-private sector engagement. Dialogue and exchange between government authorities, such as the Financial Intelligence Unit and law enforcement, and the private sector is essential for the development of relevant risk assessments that can inform both sides of not only the inherent risks, but the risk mitigating factors which can be developed and used to deter and prevent the abuse of a particular sector or industry by criminals and organized crime. The role of industry associations, such as the IPA, in providing a link and supporting public-private sector dialogue is very important. And I believe today's session is an example of this outreach. So I commend the IPA for putting together this virtual seminar. So these trends are a collection of case studies and analysis of various industry sectors that are prone to criminal activity. They serve to inform the international community, regional partners, and member states on current risks of illicit financial flows, but more importantly, they also serve to highlight new and emerging threats. In order to effectively combat and ultimately prevent the laundering of the proceeds of crime originating from an array of predicate crimes, or kejahatan asal, it is important to develop a better understanding of the vulnerabilities that lie within an industry sector and the opportunities that are presented for criminals to launder their ill-gotten gains, their dirty money. So, next slide, please. In the extractive industry, which includes the mining, oil, and gas sectors, an understanding of the context of the industry is important to identify the vulnerabilities of the industry to crimes such as corruption, bribery, and ultimately the laundering of the profits or proceeds of these crimes in this sector. Developing a good understanding of this context, the vulnerabilities of the sector to criminals, will help protect the sector from the negative impacts raised earlier in the presentation. Understanding the unique context of the sector will help the authorities, government and law enforcement, as well as private companies in protecting the industry and preventing it from becoming highly susceptible to opportunistic as well as organized crime. Generally, the extractive industry is susceptible to corruption and bribery and laundering of the proceeds of crime originating from acts of corruption and bribery. In large part, the industry is subject to this type of crime due to the nature of the business itself, in which a number of business processes can be exploited by criminals. Extractive industries are subject to a significant number of permits and licenses that are required to conduct business. Permits are required to conduct exploration for the very minerals, oil, and gas that will be extracted. Permits are required to secure the land on which drilling or extraction will take place. Permits are required for heavy vehicle access to and from the site. Permits and licenses are then required for companies and personnel to set up a drill or extraction site and then to drill on the site itself. These permits and licenses involve multiple parties and government officials at the national, regional, and local levels. In many jurisdictions, the often complex engagement with government at all three levels, including at local custom levels, or otherwise known here as the adat level, can present situations that expose officials to bribery. And this is, of course, to resort to allow those permits to be provided in the first place. Once government approvals are in place, commercial contracts are many, with small, medium, and large companies to secure the tools and services required to conduct the extraction of those very energy resources. The contracting of commercial and private companies can be quite competitive. It is subject to public procurement processes. The procurement process itself, which is made up of many stages, can be vulnerable to corruption, bribery, and the subsequent laundering of proceeds at every step. In government procurements, for example, corruption can affect all three steps of the process, from drawing up the order to placing the order and fulfilling the relevant contracts. Here, the bidding process itself can become subject to corruption and bribery, where a company seeks to get ahead of another in the bidding process. Extractive industries could find that they are contracting companies that are controlled by criminals. In this case, due diligence and knowledge of beneficial ownership are key components of an anti-money laundering program. Transnational criminals or criminals operating across borders could gain ownership of companies established in partnership with local business communities. Potentially, this is where organized crime can also secure contracts and ownership for companies under their control. The legitimate business, or in this case, a front company, could be used to commingle dirty money derived from criminal activities such as drug trafficking, smuggling, or money sourced from corruption. This commingling, as you will recall, constitutes placement of dirty money into the formal financial system. Shipping, transportation, and export and import services are also susceptible to money laundering, where under-invoicing or over-invoicing of goods shipped would be done to conceal or disguise the commingling of dirty money. This is what is referred to as trade-based money laundering. Layering and integration can be conducted through this method of money laundering. For example, a drug trafficking network may commingle money sourced from drug trafficking with a shipping company that it controls. The drug trafficker in country A places a percentage of dirty money mixed in for a legitimate payment at the bank for the importation of goods from an associated company in country B. This is placement at the bank, the formal financial system. Money is paid to the exporter's bank via wire transfer in country B for the importation of goods. This transfer across borders and between banks is a process of layering. The illegal source of the money commingled in the payment is no longer visible. The value of the transfer via the formal financial sector is reflected in the invoice for goods to be imported. But in reality, the goods imported do not match the value of the money that has now been laundered. The criminal can withdraw the proceeds that can no longer be identified with the crime through the formal financial system. An emerging area of vulnerability for Indonesia and other countries potentially is the introduction of a carbon tax for the energy sector. The carbon tax aims to support the government, in this case for Indonesia, the government's commitment to net zero emissions by 2030, as well as optimize the government's internal revenue through taxation. So using the case of Indonesia from recent publications, it appears that vulnerabilities for money laundering have already been identified by the government, mainly through the crime of corruption. At the policy stage, a number of vulnerabilities have been highlighted, including the risk of corruption at the policy development through to policy implementation phases. France and Germany have recently tried their first carbon fraud or carbon scam cases. These involved corruption around the allocation of carbon credits to companies and tax evasion on carbon credits traded across borders. As the carbon tax is introduced into Indonesia, the public and private sectors will be looking more closely into the money laundering vulnerabilities and hopefully engaging through public-private sector forums to establish clear frameworks for the detection and prevention of such frauds from occurring here. We will touch on public-private sector engagement again in the next slide. The panel discussion following the presentations this afternoon will undoubtedly discuss these vulnerabilities further, and more so in relation to the predicate crimes such as corruption and bribery that generate the proceeds for money laundering. In that sense, my colleague, Ibu Putri Wijayanti, will participate in these discussions further as well, as we will see the role of the predicate crimes for money laundering. So in summary of this slide, corruption and bribery are the key predicate crimes associated with the laundering of money from the extractive industry. The nature of the industry, how it conducts its business, presents vulnerabilities from criminals using front companies to commingle illegal and legal proceeds, also from criminals using shell companies to hide the beneficial or true ownership of companies and contracted parties. The industry is susceptible to trade-based fraud or money laundering, and given the movement of resources within the industry, criminals will also make use of laundering their proceeds through regional and international financial sectors. It is therefore crucial that organizations deploy an anti-money laundering risk assessment that is sufficiently broad in coverage and suitably tailored to your particular business in order to effectively identify and mitigate the financial crime risks to which your company may be exposed to. Next slide, please. The anti-money laundering risk assessments that a majority of you attending today will have been involved in developing and implementing in your companies is part of the broader anti-money laundering framework in place to combat and deter money laundering across the financial sector, both the banking and designated non-financial banking and professions sectors, or the DNFBP. The aims of the anti-money laundering risk assessments will be guided and directed by national anti-money laundering principles that are risk-based in nature. This risk-based approach to anti-money laundering efforts is embedded in international standards met by member states. The key international standard is that of the anti-money laundering counterfinancing of terrorism standards set by the Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF. The FATF standards highlight key recommendations that will relate to the oil and gas sector. It highlights the standards for technical compliance and effectiveness measures. And it serves to provide targets under these standards. It also serves to guide the regulation and supervision of the implementation of standards by member states. So this involves the different ways in which countries provide the regulation and supervision. In some countries, you'll have one AML-CFT regulator. In others, you will have multiple. In New Zealand, there are 3 AML-CFT regulators, for instance, and in Indonesia, of course, there are 6. So it is the division of the reporting entities of the banking and DNFBP sector, what the regulatory guidance is for the industry, the engagement with industry, and ultimately the supervision of the industry itself. The FATF will also highlight the importance of financial intelligence that can be shared between the public and the private sectors, where the private sector is at the forefront. It's at the front end of where most predicate crimes are taking place, and it's also the place in which detection of money laundering and those predicate crimes can take place. There's guidance also set for public-private sector engagement. So, what the government framework is under the Financial Intelligence Unit, for instance, the role of the regulators, the role of the private sector, anti-money laundering programs for DNFBPs in detection and reporting. So these are all sort of key elements of factors under an anti-money laundering regime and their regulations and best practices, and ensuring that framework exists within a member state's country. I'll just go over this again. So again, it's guided by the FATF standards. The AML regulation is conducted by member states on a risk-based approach to anti-money regulation and supervision, again, which is guided by the FATF standards and principles. At the national level, national and sectoral risk assessments are conducted by the government and private sectors to ensure that there's an identification of vulnerabilities and risks to particular industries and sectors. And then from that identification to then develop preventative measures or disruption tools and techniques to stop or to prevent and deter money laundering from occurring within the sector. So again, the public-private sector engagement in this realm in anti-money laundering regulation is really key. How that plays out, some member states will have quite distinguished frameworks or developed frameworks for that. It also depends on the industry type. There's a role for industry associations as well. And so a key example, I think, of the public-private sector engagement, which addresses some of the types of vulnerabilities that the extractive sector and energy sectors are presented with, is that of the development of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or the EITI. The EITI, as most of you probably knows, it's part of your industry sector as well, was developed by members to enhance the transparency of conducting business in the energy sector, which includes the extractive industries. So this is a key example of a public-private sector initiative that seeks to address the vulnerabilities and risks posed by corruption and bribery and money laundering to the sector. And as they flow, this falls straight under the guidance of provisions set out by the FATF. So it was the opacity, I think, or the lack of transparency in these business processes is what has led industry leaders to develop the EITI framework, which aims to make business processes more transparent and visible in order to deter the exploitation by criminals. And I think we can cover this more in the panel discussion as well. It'll be interesting to see some of the panelists' thoughts and also the participants' thoughts and sharing of information and experience on this. So if we go to the next slide, I think that concludes my my presentation for today. I hope that the presentation has been able to provide an overview at the global, regional, and national level of anti-money laundering or the fight against anti-money laundering. I hope it has provided you with a broader context and understanding of how your role fits in with a larger, broader, complex structure of combating and preventing money laundering. And hopefully it also has shown a link between predicate crimes such as corruption and bribery with money laundering and the sort of the laundering of the proceeds of those crimes. So with that, I will close my presentation and I look forward to listening in on the panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak, Ibu Zolda. I think it was indeed a very useful and important information for all of us, especially for in this industry, in the oil and gas industry upstream. Ibu Zolda, we have a little bit of time for Q&A. And with this, I would like to invite participants, everyone attending in the seminar, to raise hands should you have any questions. Just a little bit about Ibu Zolda Anderton. I believe from your profile, you have been in the Australian Financial Intelligence Agency for 16 years, and you have been very active in implementing programs to fight against financing of terrorism. And this is a very useful and important campaign for your mission and for our benefit as well to understand about what money laundering and counter financing terrorism. So yes, let's see if we have any questions from the floor. I think I would like to see if, please raise hand should you have any question, then we will help you to patch through the questions to Ibu Zoe. This would be a very good opportunity indeed. If not, I think, I think we have Pak Muksonrofi Vidianto. I will check with the committee if for your help to open the microphone for Pak Muksonrofi Vidianto. Pak Muksonrofi Vidianto, bisa dibuka, diaktifkan kembali mikrofonnya dan silakan.
Yes, thank you, Mbak Lia. Can you hear me well?
Yes, silakan Pak.
Okay, thank you, Bu Zoe. As regarding the presentation of the anti-money laundering and related regulation, and also the risk that we need to consider regarding our sector in oil and gas. One thing that come up for my question, Bu Zoe, what do you think about the risk ranking of oil and gas sector related with anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing, if we compared with other sectors like financial institution, both in banking and non-banking institution, seems that the regulation and monitoring of the IML and ETF is more strict or more regulated in those financial institution sectors, more than that we see in oil and gas sector. I think that's a question that I have. Thank you, Bu Zoe and Bu Lia.
Terima kasih, Pak Mukson. Silakan Ibu Zoe.
Thank you very much, Pak Muson, for your question. I think if I gauge your question right, and please follow up with me, in terms of the risk ranking between, say, the oil and gas sector and the banking sector, what are the differences? And I think your question was whether one or the other is regulated more. I think in relation to risk rankings, there will be a difference depending on the member state, depending on the country, depending on the exact context. There will be differences in the vulnerability ranking of the oil and gas sector to the banking sector. And so I think in anti-money laundering, over the years, there's been a lot of sort of effort and analysis put in to the banking sector, because the primary aim of anti-money laundering is to secure the financial sector, the integrity of the financial sector. It is key and important to avoid the impacts that were raised in my presentation earlier. So there's been a lot more energy, I suppose, placed into the banking sector so that there's more defined frameworks on anti-money laundering in that sector. Oil and gas, I think in terms of, whether one is regulated more or not, I think, so we have the banking sector, and then we have the designated non-banking financial and business professions, the DNFBPs. So that's how we kind of, in the AML world, kind of see the two distinctions. And the DNFBPs include lawyers, accountants, other kind of industries and sectors that don't fall under the banking. So this is where I suppose the oil and gas industry would fall. Now, if you can imagine, the DNFBP sector is highly diverse. So the level to which the regulations occur really is a reflection of how much work has gone into developing the analysis and how much effort has been placed in the public-private sector engagement between government and the private sector on the vulnerabilities and risks that are specific to a particular industry. So I think the baseline for DNFBPs, any AML framework, the baseline would be, for instance, STRs, right? Suspect transaction reports at the very least. So this is where DNFBPs, whether they're the professions or industries, are asked to report into the government, and usually it would be the Financial Intelligence Agency, anything that they see that is out of the ordinary, anything that they may suspect, is part of a predicate crime like corruption or bribery or smuggling or trafficking, or if they've detected money laundering, where it seems like there's been commingling of funds. So in terms of sort of regulation, best practice would suggest that the public-private sector engagement, which is what the FATF places emphasis on as well, is really key in developing that broader level understanding of a particular industry, but also then associating the finite vulnerabilities and risks that are present in that industry and working, between government and private sector to address those. And in addressing those, some of the tools that come out of these things are sort of disruption tools and techniques for industries to put in place, red flag indicators for, compliance officers within your companies, so that when they see transactions or they're looking at contracts, there are certain things that can serve as red flag indicators where they can sort of think, oh, right, this may actually require a report to be submitted or further information, or they may be aware of, research that the public-private sector engagement working group, for instance, is working on, or the industry association is supporting, and can contribute to developing a better understanding of that. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question in a roundabout way, But those are kind of the differences between the banking and DNFPP sector, and the importance, therefore, of the public-private sector engagement in developing robust regulation around their industries to prevent and deter money laundering and other predicate crimes.
Thank you, Bu Zoe, for the thorough response. I think we still have time for another question. We already have a question in the chat box. It is from Ibu Rini Respati. Ibu Rini, if you are here, you may also open your mic to convey your question to Ibu Zoe. Dipersilakan, Ibu Rini. Instead, I would read out the questions for you, Ibu Zoe. I think, yeah, okay. Oh, silakan Ibu Rini.
Sorry.
Silakan
Yes,
Ibu
you
Rini.
hear me? Okay, it's just unmute. Right, Bu Sulda, thank you for the presentation. It's really open our mind about the anti-money laundering. Bu Zoe, just I'm still trying to grasp how it works in our daily work, and then also with regards to oil and gas as well, because there, as you already presented, there are many activities that could be involved in the EML. So just would like to understand, probably do you have any example or case where the money laundering involved in the export-import? Because earlier you mentioned there is a different transaction between the goods that receive and also the money that transferred to the recipient. Could you please just clarify about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Burini, for your question. Certainly. So yes, I understand that in your daily roles, all the attendees here, anti-money laundering is a key element, I hope, for your understanding and your consideration as well. As previously stated, procurement processes, contract processes, the industry itself lends itself to so many processes that are vulnerable to predicate crimes and money laundering. In the case of export and import, yes, so primarily with the export, import, sort of transportation, shipping elements of the business, this portion of the business will be specifically or particularly vulnerable to trade-based money laundering. So trade-based money laundering is sort of where primarily is conducted through over or under invoicing of goods and products to be shipped, across borders too. And that is seen as an opportunity, I suppose, from a criminal element to be able to move funds, to move their ill-gotten gains across borders, across banks, and through, wire transfers and payment systems to launder their money. And oftentimes, this is where sort of organized crime enters into the space where they have control of companies. So where there's going to be over or under invoicing, there has to be compliance at either end of the businesses, in country A or company A and company B, possibly in country B as well. So the complicity of those officers would denote that organized crime or crime elements have control over a particular company or a contracting element of the company. And that's where, we're looking at sort of front companies and shell companies. And so, I don't know, for the oil and gas industry, I suppose if there's an order for, 100 barrels to come across from, let's say, country B into country A, payment for those barrels, it can be over invoiced, so that instead of paying, $100 for the 100 barrels, you'll be making a payment of $200. And the $100 is probably legitimate for the barrels, but the extra additional amount of money is actually what is commingled from illicit funds. So perhaps one of the owners of a company is also involved in drug trafficking. So they've received their monies, they've got it all there. How do they then enter it into the formal financial system to cleanse the origin of it, right? And so shipping is a great avenue to do that when you have the complicity of officers willing to under or over invoice, to adjust those pricing and invoicing to allow for illicit funds to be commingled and transferred across borders, banks, and accounts. I hope that answers the question.
Baik. Baik, terima kasih Bu Zoe. Ibu Rini, demikian respon jawaban dari Ibu Zoe, mudah-mudahan bermanfaat. Hopefully we still have one more question, Ibu Zoe, if you don't mind, before we move on to the next session. I think the next question is from Ibu Esther Marianto. Ibu Esther, you are free to open your microphone to convey the question.
Okay, Ibu Zoe, I just would like to ask, how do you perceive the reporting of EETI that has been implemented by Indonesia since 2012 to the AML policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's Ibu Esther for your question. In relation to Indonesia's reporting on the EITI, I wouldn't have much visibility of that at all in terms of the broader AML structure. The visibility that we would have on that would be Indonesia's responses, or how do you say, responses to its assessment of its AML framework. And I'm sure the EITI will form part of the responses to that assessment. And in the last assessment of Indonesia, Indonesia actually did very well on its mutual evaluation, particularly in relation to anti-money laundering. So in relation to the exact specifics of the perception of that reporting, or if you're seeking feedback on the level of that kind of reporting, I would suggest that there would be further dialogue directly with the government, perhaps with the Financial Intelligence Agency or the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, who would be able to provide you with detailed feedback on that. Perhaps the IPA could also be in a position to help support that engagement and dialogue for you as well. That would be sort of my view on it and my response. I don't know if my colleague, Putri, if you have anything to add to that.
Thanks Zoe. Ya, terima kasih banyak Ibu Esther atas pertanyaannya. Jadi memang EITI ini sebenarnya adalah platform yang sebenarnya mendorong perusahaan untuk membuka data dan mendorong transparansi dan akuntabilitas di sektor ekstraktif. Dan ini sebenarnya kalau terkait money laundering yang dapat dilihat sebenarnya yang paling utama adalah terkait open datanya dan beneficial owner transparency. Nah, kedua hal ini bisa membantu sebenarnya dari sisi dari sisi regulator ataupun perusahaan untuk mencegah pencucian uang tentunya, karena saat kita bisa terbuka mengenai siapa BO-nya, tentu sesama dalam industri oil and extractive industry sendiri saat bertransaksi akan lebih mengenal siapa mitra bisnis yang sedang yang mitra bisnis saat ini. Jadi mitigasi resiko bahwa nanti terjadi commingling atau bahwa sebenarnya transaksi ini memfasilitasi transfer of proceed of crime itu bisa dicegah. Jadi inilah sebenarnya aspek laporan EITI ini bisa supporting upaya pencegahan money laundering dan pendanaan terorisme. Sekian, itu aja.
Terima kasih Mbak Putri atas responnya. Mbak Putri adalah National Anti-Corruption Coordinator for UNODC Indonesia ikut hadir di sini, dan Ibu Zoe dan Mbak Putri juga nanti akan hadir juga dalam panel diskusi. Maka dengan demikian pertanyaan selanjutnya akan kami bawa ke sesi panel diskusi, termasuk pertanyaan yang terakhir disampaikan Ibu Shanet. Mohon maaf sebelumnya, tapi akan kita teruskan ke panel diskusi. So, thank you once again, Ibu Zoe and Mbak Putri, and all the participants for the questions and answer sessions for the interesting interactive sessions. Let's before we move on to the second session, I would like to invite our colleague to share with us the AML survey result form for all of us. I think Pa Aditya, if you can help us to share the survey result form.
Sure.
Here you go.
Okay. Okay. I already share my screen. Anyone, have you seen that?
Yeah, Pak Aditya.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Bulia, for the opportunity given. So I think from the previous presentation that already conveyed by Bu Zoe and Bu Putri, I hope we can obtain another understanding and enrich our knowledge on the AML. And then for this occasion, I would like to share the result of the AML questionnaire that we already sent to all of you. First of all, we would like to thank you for your participation and your attention to fill in the questionnaire, including those who already provide the response recently. We appreciate it as well. So actually, this questionnaire, the objective, we would like to understand more on your AML compliance program, including understand what is the AML risk within oil and gas industry. And yeah, basically, this questionnaire consists of a set of questions. First is regarding the compliance with the anti-money laundering law. So it's interesting because most of the participants, since you're operated in Indonesia, you're agree to comply with the Indonesia anti-money laundering law. And the second response is comply with the US anti-money laundering law, and the rest is the UK anti-money laundering law. The next question is the existence of the anti-money laundering policy. So actually, based on the previous question, that there is a requirement to comply with the Indonesia anti-money laundering law. So we agree that most of the participants, most of the participants, they give their answer yes. There is 75 participants. They are already established the anti-money laundering policy. Hoping for the rest participants who haven't developed their anti-money laundering policy, obtain the idea on how to develop their anti-money laundering policy based on our session today. And then the next question is the socialization and communication of the AML policy to the employee, customer, and then the partners, vendors, and business associates. So around 75% of the respondents, they already conducted the socialization and communication to the employee, customer, partners, and the others, 25%, they are informed that they have not conduct the socialization and communication. And next is the function who is responsible to ensure the compliance with a AML policy. That is interesting because most of the participants, they confirm that the function who is responsible to ensure compliance with the AML policy is the ABCF function. Is the part of the anti-bribery compliance function, and the others is the legal, and the last one is the AML function. that is interesting because as we know that based on the ISO 37001, there is one function which named as the anti-bribery compliance function, as based on the presentation that conveyed by Bu Zoe, there is a there is a connection between the corruption and the anti-money laundering. The next question is the implementation of due diligence to the customer, partners, vendor, agent, distributor, and investor. So yes, most of the respondents provide an answer that 94% of their vendor has been due diligence, and then 63% our respondent respond that they already conducted due diligence to the partners, and the rest is the customer, agent, distributor, and then last one is the investor and others, which due diligence to the employee. And the next question is the area or business transaction who having a high exposure on the money laundering. So all of the respondents agreed that procurement process is the first one, and then next is the financing process or investment from lenders, and the third is the participating interest. And I think there is I don't know. I think there is an interesting point that if we revert to the question regarding the business transaction, the financing or investment activity is one of the top two business transactions who have a high exposure. But on the previous question, the investor is not part of the even it's not part of the top three for the one who must conducted due diligence to them. So I think based on our discussion today and during the panel discussion that will be conveyed by the our speakers, we hope that we can obtain additional understanding, including on the procurement process, who will be presented by the our speakers from the NFP. And last but not least is the anti-money laundering compliance program that has been implemented by company. So the first one is the due diligence. I think all of the respondents agreed that due diligence is a must for the anti-money IML compliance program. And the next is the establish the AML policy. And the third is socialization and communication, the AML policy to the our third party, to the vendors, partners, investor, and our business associate as well. And next is the check and declare the ultimate beneficial owner, and documenting the suspicious activity transaction report. And the last one is reporting the suspicious activity to the law enforcer. So I think there is our sharing on the AML result, and hoping that during our session today, we will obtain another understanding, another idea on how to implement the anti-money laundering compliance program, including what is do's and don'ts when we implement the anti-money laundering compliance program. I think it's all from my presentation. Again, thank you for your participation, and I would like to return the opportunity to MC Julia. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mas Aditya. Right, ladies and gentlemen, para hadirin, terima kasih Mas Aditya atas sharing hasil dari survei formnya. Para hadirin, ladies and gentlemen, selanjutnya kita akan memasuki sesi kedua. We will have the presentation from the Hogan Lovells DNFP law firm from Bapak Halid Haidir and Bapak Teguh Darmawan. The next presentation will be about exposure to the risk of money laundering in procurement process in the upstream oil and gas industry. A little bit of a brief profile about Pak Haidir, Pak Halid Haidir. He is also known as or claimed as rich in knowledge and experience by Chambers Asia Pacific 2021. And Pak Teguh Darmawan as a senior associate in the DNFP with a brief profile, we could say, with more than a decade of experience in dispute resolution and corporate investigations, experience in handling criminal matters, investigations with color crime and fraud. Without further ado, let's welcome Pak Halid Haidir dan Pak Teguh Darmawan. Kami persilakan.
Terima kasih Bu Lia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank you very much for Ibu Marjolin, Bapak Roni, beserta seluruh panitia dan anggota IPA to invite us to present in this event. Thank you also to Ibu Zoe and Ibu Putri for a fruitful and very knowledgeable presentation for us. We were requested to present on exposure to the risk of money laundering in procurement process in the upstream oil and gas industry. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just to introduce myself also and Teguh, our brand name, our firm brand name is Hogan Lovells DNFP. But our firm is called Dewi Negara and Fahri. We are an Indonesian firm having an association with Hogan Lovells. Hogan Lovells is a US and UK based international firm. And we both myself, we already been as a lawyer for 22 years. Teguh is 18 years. We are a dispute and litigation lawyer. Also involved a lot in anti-bribery and also anti-money laundering. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we have a sub practice in our firm. It called investigation white collar and fraud practice, IWCF, in which we do a lot of Teguh especially do a lot of corporate investigation, and usually this includes investigating for any anti-bribery, any bribery issue or fraud issue inside the company, in which this and we represent client for that. However, sometimes the summon from KPK, Attorney General, or the police for corruption is usually there is two indictment. One is for corruption, and usually the other one is for anti-money laundering. So that is what we do. Next slide, please. I think to start the presentation, we know that in this presentation we will discuss exposure of anti-money laundering in upstream in oil and gas business. In general, I think everybody here knows about the procurement in the oil and gas. In general, procurement is every activity involved in obtaining goods and services for the company needs to support its daily operation. Especially for oil and gas industry in Indonesia, SKK Migas has issued guidance on procurement of goods and service. Under the said guidance, the scope of procurement in the upstream oil and gas industry comprise of planning of procurement, tender process, management of contract, management of vendors, and dispute resolution also. Relevant regulation on procurement is Law number 22, as all of you know, year 2001 regarding oil and gas, and SKK Migas. As far as we know, we note that under the gross split regime, SKK Migas guidance can be used as a reference in the procurement process. We understand some oil and gas companies that has concession under the gross split regime have already issued their own regulation and procurement. The question is why anti-money laundering relevant in the oil and gas industry? So I think Bu Zoe already explained about anti-money laundering in a specific way also, but the one thing that we see in our business, meaning as a lawyer also, is not directly anti-money laundering, because directly what is more important is oil and gas industry is still considered as a risky as for fraud, bribery, or other financial crime that we can see usually in our news or in Indonesia. Some expert views that this is due to poor due diligence process. In terms of procurement, we are of the view that anti-money laundering risk for oil and gas operator is quite small, as they are the one paying the vendors. However, for vendors, to appoint vendor, it is a must to do a due diligence process and know your customer or vendor to mitigate the risk of anti-money laundering. So the bribery and corruption is quite a high risk. The anti-money laundering is still quite low. It is important to conduct a thorough vendor due diligence process, as this can reduce the risk, not only from anti-money laundering perspective, but other risks such as anti-bribery and corruption or fraud, which these are the criminal acts that has really close relationship with anti-money laundering. I think Ibu Zoe already touched a little bit on this, but I think we need to explain it again also in this webinar. For domestic in Indonesia, based on the Indonesian risk assessment on money laundering, the highest risk of domestic money laundering is from proceeds of corruption and narcotics. So based on that result, corruption and narcotics are the types of crime originating from money laundering, which are categorized as high risk of money laundering. Criminal acts as taxation, criminal acts in the banking sector, criminal acts in forestry sector or environmental is usually it is categorized as medium-sized money laundering. Corporation and individuals are perpetrators of money laundering, which are included in the high-risk category. Official of legislative, government institution, or employees of SOE, with this, based on this research, are types of individual jobs profiles that are categorized as high risk. Furthermore, other occupation profile entrepreneurs, professional and consultant is categorized as medium risk. Limited liability companies also have a high risk as a perpetrator and facilities for money laundering. For the industries with having a high risk of money laundering acts is motor vehicle traders, property companies, property agents, commercial bank, foreign exchange trader. This is categorized in a high risk. Because I don't know about this, but I think this is because Jakarta is the capital city and the center of economic in Indonesia. So at the moment, Jakarta is a high risk area for money laundering. Other that is medium risk for money laundering is East Java, West Java, Central Java, North Sumatra, and Bali. And use of false identities, use of nominees in loan names, trust, family members, or third-party property real estate is categorized as a high-risk money laundering, while others such as using credit cards, checks, debt arrangement, trading in jewelry, purchase arts, antiques, is using an offshore banks, international business company, using shell companies, and using company to proceed criminal act in the field of taxation is still, and gambling activities is still a medium risk. Regarding oil and gas industries, the critical point is about compliance system that we think before Teguh and I talk about the regulation in Indonesia, we think the compliance system kicks in as the most important thing in an oil and gas company, especially procurement. As you know, anti-money laundering issues almost always relates to anti-corruption or a corruption issue, or fraud, or other criminal conduct. But what we see is usually a corruption issue like bribery or others, or fraud. As I mentioned before, although oil and gas sector is not one of the high-risk sector for money laundering, however, we need to be very careful when doing business with the vendor or any third party. We need to be clear, sure that their money is coming from a reliable source. We need to do background check. I know there is already a question whether due diligence is enough, what kind of background check, but we think that we need to put a good information or data request to our third party about what is their main business, from what source of fund they use for capital in the beginning when they're establishing the company or their business, and from where they generate their revenue. Also, this is one of the important, also do a desk research on the third party for their track records, civil or criminal, if any, research of the owner or the stakeholder of the company, whether the owner or their family or relative have or can be considered as a high risk people for the money laundering, because this is quite important. Sometimes if we do a background check, we check the shareholder, we never check, we check the director, we check everyone on the company, but we never check outside, meaning outside the company, meaning the cousin or something like that. It is not easy to do this kind of check, but it is still, we can still do that by a desk research. One example that I think will impact, this is not an impact directly to the oil and gas company, but it could impact the business of the oil and gas company. For example, one oil and gas company via a procurement division needs to do a tender for building an office or a rig, and we already have a winner for that. Although we are not involved in any money laundering, but if the winner of the tender are investigate for corruption or money laundering and potential use this money to finance the project. So as you know, if they win the tender, they still need to inject money to even though they get paid, but they still need to inject the capital to do the work. There will be a possibility that the rig or the building will be confiscated by the authorities, and this can delay the project significantly and impact the oil and gas business. And the one thing that a lot of clients is what do you call it, afraid to do, because we are not involved in the corruption, we are not involved in the anti-money laundering, the money laundering, the potential money laundering, but we will be summoned to the police or to the authority to explain that we are not involved in that. So the background check is very important. Due diligence is quite important, because this could be a hassle, because this will impact everywhere, even though we don't do anything, but we are being called by the authorities, and this case is going to the media. We need to take care of the media, we need to take care of everything. This could be a headache. So that kind of thing, I think could be a very important part, and I think this could impact the business of oil and gas company. Next slide, please. yeah, after this I will give to Teguh Darmawan, but just a history of anti-money laundering law in Indonesia. The government first enact money laundering law in Indonesia in 2002, law number 15 in year 2002 regarding crime of money laundering. It appears that the government became aware of the importance of having money laundering regime since the inclusion of Indonesia in the non-cooperative list by the FATF in 2001. As a consequence, the international community would not have any relationship with the financial institution in Indonesia if Indonesia did not take action to prevent money laundering. But law number 15 is still considered weak. So 1 year later, the law was amended by law number 25, 2003. And in 2010, the government enacted a new law to replace the previous law that I mentioned, law number 8 of 2010 regarding presentation, eradication of crime of money laundering, to provide a stronger legal basis in preventing and eradicating money laundering. After this, the next slide, please. I give it to Teguh.
Thank you, Halid. So if we talk about money laundering in Indonesia, I think the relevant articles from the law number 8 of 2010 is article 3, 4, and 5, because in those articles, they discuss about what is the elements of the crime and also the penalty if violating the said elements of crime. And the terms, I will not read the articles. I think maybe you all are already familiar with that. But the terms setiap orang here including like individuals and also companies. So the law also has specific sections discussing about corporate criminal liability. And I'll discuss about those issues more specifically in the upcoming slides. So Article 3 is considered as the crime for a person who committed the predicated crime. It can be in the form of what we discuss here, like corruptions or fraud, and also the person who is then placing that proceeds from crime into the system, so washing the money. That's why Article 3 and Article 4 is considered as an active action because it's conducted by the person who is actively doing the money laundering activity. According to PP report, the most prosecution happening in Indonesia is actually on Article 3. About 80% of cases is related with violation of Article 3. This is data from 2016 up to 2022. Maybe now it's already changed, but during that period, this is the most article used to then prosecute money laundering. Now, just to maybe provide an understanding of how to applying this law, I will then read maybe a case study of a previous decision. This is decided by Surabaya Court. The predicate or original crime is corruption, and this is involving a pejabat negara or state administrator. So from the pursuit of the corruption activity, he then hide and disguise the result into like opening 10 bank accounts and then exchange those money into foreign currencies. In this particular case, it goes to US dollar, a Singapore dollar, and also Saudi Arabia. And he also purchased assets, cars, properties using his family names like wife or children under those properties. And he also purchased heavy equipments with which then he ran into other company. And assets such as gold, shares in the company, and he used also some cash for transaction. And this been identified by PPATK throughout their investigation. Next slides, please. Now for Article 4, it seems that the perpetrator might not be the one who conducted the predicated crime. So this is a person who then actively helping to do the washing of the money, the money laundering activity. As I mentioned earlier, that Article 3 seems to be much more popular in Indonesia to be applied. 4 and 5, it's roughly around 20% combined. And specifically for this one, I tried to find a case that I can show here, but unfortunately I cannot find it. Maybe it's out there. Apologize for that. But maybe yeah, later if you have any further questions about Article 4, we can discuss further. Next slides, please. So for Article 5, it's seen as a passive money laundering action because this is more like the person enjoying the proceeds of the crime. And one of the case study I think to highlight this article is this is the case in Bali involving also a conflict of the predicate crime is corruption. And this person, a government official as well, has been sentenced. Now, this person is working with his cousin, who is actually just a driver working in one of the company. So the conflict then made his cousins to be a shareholder of a company, and then also holding a title of a commissioner in that company. And the money then put into that company as part of the revenue of the company, and then they also like purchase land, assets to be or held under this the cousin's name. So the cousins then prosecuted by the law enforcement agency based on violation of Article 5. Next slides, please. So if we talking about the potential of money laundering in the law 8/2010, it's already mentioned that the target can be a personal, individual, or corporate. Obviously, for individual, the penalty can be in the form of imprisonment, violation of 345. The maximum is 20, depending on which article you violate, but the maximum is 20, and then the penalty is up to 10 billion rupiah. While for a company, obviously the company cannot be put in jail, so the penalty is in terms of financial penalty up to 100 billion rupiah, and some additional sanctions can be imposed for company, including among others, they can freeze part of the whole of the business, revocation of licenses, the company can be dissolved, or confiscate the company's asset. Now, maybe the question is why then company can be then prosecuted for violating the anti-money laundering law. So under the law, it's also already explained that company can be held liable if the instructions to commit the crime, it's coming from the management of the company. So in this case, the director. And obviously the act itself has a benefit for the company. So not only individual, this is for the company. The perpetrators who committed the crime is also acting based on the role that they have in the company. And the activity is conducted to fulfill also the objective of the company. So in Indonesia, as far as we understand, there has been one company being prosecuted for violation of anti-money laundering, which I will then discuss in the next slides. Now, in terms of the enforcement agencies, I think the most popular one, obviously, the police and KPK, because nowadays, for the violation of corruption, KPK normally also put anti-money laundering as one of the indictment. One of the reason is because the penalty under the corruption law is lower than the one in anti-money laundering. So that's why they put anti-money laundering as well, to then hopefully give efek jera gitu ya for the perpetrators. Other agency can also investigate if it's related with narcotics, then BNN, Dirjen Pajak, dan Kepabeanan bisa juga, and then PPNS can also or a civil servant investigator within ministry can also investigate any violation of the crime. Next slide, please. Specifically for corporate criminal liability, I already mentioned about Law 8 2010, but it's also good to understand the Supreme Court Regulation 13 2016. So the history of this Supreme Court is actually imposed because of corruption case initially. So at that time, KPK found out that not only a lot of person committed corruption, but they need to also sentence company for committing or violating the anti-corruption law. Another problem is, although I think Indonesia has recognized corporate criminal liability since years, but there is only limited successful story of a prosecutor successfully prosecuted a company. One of the reasons is, according to the law enforcement agency, is because it's lack of guidance on how to then conducted the investigation and then preparing the indictment documents, how to then prove the elements of crime, things like that. So then KPK get initiative. They gather with the police, with the AGO, with the Supreme Court. They discuss about how then the easiest way to then issue a regulation that can solve this problem. Having Parliament issuing a law, maybe that's not the quickest way, so they decided to then go with this route, having the Supreme Court issuing Regulation 13 2016. So because of that, we see that there is a trend for KPK, police, and Attorney General Office, specifically for corruption case. They start to then put company as a suspect for violation of that law. And like I mentioned, there's the first company that we know already indicted for violation of anti-money laundering law. What is interesting in this Supreme Court regulation, other than the way how then law enforcement agency can investigate and prosecute company, is also there is an article here which provide protection for company. So as long as the judge has discretion to then consider what sentence will be imposed to a company, by also considering the type of compliance policy already have or performed by that company. So company need to be able to show to the court that they already have a good compliance systems in order to avoid any negative result from the investigation or prosecution. I think that's basically what the regulation said, and I think that's really important for companies to have then a good compliance system, because that can be used as a tools to defend themselves in the worst case scenario. Next, please. So now I will touch a bit on the first company that was prosecuted. Unfortunately, I cannot find any information whether that already a sentence on that case, since this case is around 18 and 19, supposed to be already, but I cannot find anything at the Supreme Court website, so I apologize for that. But in a sense, the case is again related with corruption, and the perpetrator of corruption then using this company to then wash the money coming from proceeds of corruption by then integrating the money into the company's account, show it as revenue, and then use it for operating costs of the company. And then also the company was elected as a winner for several projects for that region. But then in actual, there is another company who's then doing the work. So based on that, this company is prosecuted for violating Article 3, which is then active action, and also Article 5 as a passive action. That's maybe the one of the cases that I can share with you. In terms of procurement, specifically for oil and gas industry, I cannot find anything in the Supreme Court website. But what I think we see in, I guess, one of now well-known case, I guess, in Indonesia involving one of the airline here, is the president director at that time was actually being influenced to pick a winner for the airline, for the plane that will be used by the airline, and he received a bribery. So this, although this is related to procurement, but this is done individually, so the company was not involved or prosecuted because of that, and this is merely just individual action only. So I guess that's conclude our presentation for today. Hopefully this is gonna be useful for all of you to give a bit of understanding and introduction about anti-money laundering regulation in Indonesia. And Khalid and I will be more than happy to then have a further discussion during panel discussion, and also response to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Pak Khalid, and also Pak Teguh. I think let's give some a bit of time for the audience. Should they have any questions in regards to the material you have shared with us? Apabila ada pertanyaan sekiranya dari para hadirin atau peserta, mohon dapat raise hands atau juga sampaikan pertanyaan di chat box, akan kami bantu sampaikan. Sebelumnya, mungkin sambil menunggu Pak Khalid dan Pak Teguh, ada juga beberapa pertanyaan yang sudah kami kumpulkan sambil menunggu dari pertanyaan dari floor. Mungkin saya bawakan ada beberapa, kayak saya mulai dengan pertanyaan, salah satunya adalah terkait apakah ada peraturan spesifik yang mengatur mengenai resiko money laundering dalam kegiatan industri oil and gas. Seperti itu.
Terima kasih Ibu Lia. Sampai saat ini ya, mungkin itu sih singkat kali ya jawabannya. Sampai saat ini anti money laundering itu masih cukup general, jadi masih spesifik ke perbankan seperti itu. Tapi kalau secara peraturan tidak ada yang mengatur mengenai money laundering khusus dalam industri oil and gas, sepengetahuan kami gitu. Lebih banyak kepada perbankan atau yang mentouch jasa keuangan lah, seperti itu Bu Lia.
Baik. Jadi masih dominan di industri di luar oil and gas, kurang lebih seperti itu, khususnya di jasa keuangan.
Betul.
Baik. Pertanyaan selanjutnya, Pak Khalid, Pak Teguh, kalau tidak keberatan, terkait dengan Undang-Undang Nomor 8 Tahun 2010 Pasal 3 yang tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Teguh, mengenai perbuatan atas harta kekayaan yang diketahuinya atau patut diduganya merupakan hasil tindak pidana. Pertanyaannya, upaya apa yang dapat dilakukan dalam industri oil and gas untuk menjaga praktek bisnis terhindar dari perbuatan ini?
Ya, saya coba jawab, Bu Lia. Jadi kalau balik lagi tadi pertama-tama pasal 3 itu konteksnya adalah tindakan aktif ya. Jadi memang yang dihukum berdasarkan pasal itu maksud dan tujuannya adalah pertama dia yang melakukan perbuatan pidana awalnya dan juga dia melakukan pelanggaran terhadap peraturan pencucian uang gitu. Nah, jadi kalau melihat dari konteks itu pertama-tama tentunya kemungkinan besar asumsi saya ya di teman-teman di oil and gas ini targetnya kemungkinan kan lebih ke individu ya kali ya, bukan perusahaan. Karena kebanyakan perusahaan setahu saya kan punya value yang cukup kuat, apalagi di oil and gas gitu ya. Jadi memang untuk menguatkan individunya tentunya memang masalah kayak penguatan code of conduct, code of ethic mungkin, dan juga value-value company, itu memang harus secara rutin disampaikan dan training-trainingnya berjalan gitu ya. Nah, untuk menghindari mungkin kalau dari sisi masuknya dana yang tidak dikenal kali yang bisa berpotensi, ya memang sekali lagi know your customer, prinsip-prinsip yang diterapkan oleh teman-teman di perbankan kali, due diligence itu memang harus diperkuat dan terus dilaksanakan. Nah, training-training mengenai hal ini pun harus rutin dilaksanakan. Tadi mungkin kalau melihat dari hasil survei sepertinya sih sudah berjalan ya, paling nggak tiap tahun ada training. Sama seperti kami juga sebenarnya. Tadi kan Bu Zoe juga menyinggung bahwa lawyer terutama salah satu yang disorot karena biasanya ya seperti mungkin banyak di berita juga dilihat ya bahwa kita jadi kaki tangannya untuk para pelaku ini untuk mencuci uangnya. Jadi memang kita pun
Mereka bukan
mereka,
kita. Ya.
mereka, ya.
Penting,
Jadi
Pak.
kita pun dapat tiap tahun pun harus ikut training sama. Jadi seperti teman-teman di oil and gas. Jadi mungkin itu jawaban saya, Mbak Lia.
Baik. Terima kasih Pak Teguh. Jadi memang penting training-training untuk meningkatkan pemahaman awareness tentang money laundering practices supaya kita juga bisa meningkatkan sense and sensibilitas untuk dalam hal reviewing due diligence, karena seperti kita ketahui due diligence proses itu sudah banyak dilakukan, namun lebih baik lagi agar kita lebih memahami untuk apa dan bagaimana sifat-sifat atau tipikal atau karakter dari praktek anti money laundering.
Ya, mungkin kalau saya boleh sedikit sharing tentang due diligence. Jadi kita ada pengalaman kemarin ini kebetulan bantu klien yang kita lihat memang mungkin rezim di Indonesia menyambung tadi ada pertanyaan due diligence juga memang mungkin belum terlalu dalam ya due diligence-nya dan belum ada juga mungkin threshold yang jelas sebenarnya ekspektasinya seperti apa. Tapi kalau mungkin terutama teman-teman yang punya afiliasinya di US atau di UK, sepertinya peraturan di sana sudah makin ketat gitu. Jadi tingkat due diligence-nya terus terang standarnya sudah lebih tinggi dibanding Indonesia. Jadi kalau standar itu di-apply dan dibawa ke Indonesia, seharusnya sih posisinya sudah lebih dari cukup dan aman ya.
Baik,
gitu.
Baik. Terima kasih banyak Pak Teguh. Saya cek dulu sedikit lagi apakah ada pertanyaan lain. Baik, mungkin dari saya cek kembali di chat ada raise hands atau tidak. Oke. Pertanyaan selanjutnya akan kami bawa ke sesi panel discussions, di mana di situ akan sangat lebih interaktif dan menarik. Tentunya terima kasih banyak Pak Halid dan Pak Teguh atas paparannya, informasinya, dan waktunya. Stay tune, tetap hadir di panel discussions bersama moderator kami. Untuk sebelum mengakhiri sesi 2, saat ini saya ingin mengundang para hadirin, para keynote speakers, untuk membuka kameranya karena kita akan melakukan sesi foto bersama untuk dokumentasi panitia ECC. Jadi kita akan dibantu oleh panitia untuk mengambil fotonya. Sebentar. Mohon berkenannya untuk para hadirin untuk membuka kameranya dan tentunya memberikan senyum terbaiknya. Oke, sebentar lagi kita akan ambil foto. Oke. Oke, dalam hitungan 3, terima kasih Bu Meti. Oke, sepertinya kita sudah siap. Mari kita lihat kamera saya akan pandu dalam hitungan ketiga on cue 3, 2, 1 then we'll take a picture. Oke, ready? Oke, let's wait for a second. Oke, on a count of 3. 1, 2, 3, smile. I can hear the click. I think that's it. We got it captured very well. Thank you very much. Terima kasih semua. Sekarang kita akan mengambil waktu rehat. We'll take a 5 minutes break for everyone to have a drink and refreshment. And we will be back in 5 minutes. So we'll see you again in 10 minutes past 3. We will start again with a very interesting interactive quiz. So please make sure you're there. I'll see you in 5 minutes. Terima kasih. Sampai ketemu di 5 menit mendatang. Oke, para hadirin, cek-cek. Kita kembali ke seminar. Sebelum memulai kembali, saya ingin mengajak para peserta, para hadirin untuk membuka kembali videonya sebelum kita memulai panel diskusi. Dan sebenarnya sebelum memulai panel diskusi, kami ingin sedikit melakukan warming up. Kita akan mengadakan quiz yang akan dilemparkan ke para peserta, para hadirin. Sama formatnya dengan sebelumnya di sesi Q&A. Dari saya akan melemparkan pertanyaan. Para hadirin yang diundang untuk memberikan jawaban yang tepat, tercepat, dengan cara menuliskan jawabannya di chat box. Saya akan melemparkan 3 pertanyaan. Bagi pemenang, 3 pemenangnya, kami telah menyiapkan hadiah menarik, token menarik dari panitia ECC. Oke, sebentar, saya siapkan pertanyaannya. Pertanyaan-pertanyaan ini sudah diracik dan disiapkan oleh panitia sedemikian rupa untuk para hadirin hari ini, supaya kita menjaga silaturahmi dan tetap berwawasan tentunya. Baik, siap dengan pertanyaan pertama. Pertanyaan pertama, apa persamaan uang dan rahasia? Apa persamaan uang dan rahasia? Silakan. Saya berikan waktu 10 detik. Pertama, apa persamaan uang dan rahasia? Monggo. Pak Halid, saya disqualify. Pak Halid, mohon maaf. Pak Mukson belum, sedikit lagi. Pak, Ibu Zina Rimba. Oke, Ibu Zina Rimba. Ibu Zina Rimba, jawabannya boleh. Ibu Zina dibuka mikrofonnya sebentar, Pak Posma boleh dibantu. Ibu Zina, jawabannya boleh dibacakan. Apa persamaan uang dan rahasia?
Sama-sama susah dipegang.
Betul sekali, Ibu. Terima kasih, selamat. Nanti Ibu akan dikontak, dihubungi oleh panitia untuk token hadiahnya. Terima kasih. Baik. Mohon maaf tadi Pak Halid karena Bapak keynote speaker, sementara saya parkir dulu, didiskualifikasi dulu. Oke. Baik, siap dengan pertanyaan kedua. Ini sekali lagi saya ingin menceritakan panitia sudah meracik pertanyaan sedemikian rupa. Jadi mohon diperhatikan, pertanyaan kedua adalah jas apa yang bikin hangat? Jas apa yang bikin hangat? Silakan. 10 detik dari sekarang. Jas apa yang bikin hangat? Ibu Esther Marianto, Ibu Esther Marianto silakan. Oh sorry, mohon maaf. Di atasnya ada Bapak Arga. Bapak Arga Wahyudi, silakan dibuka mikrofonnya dan mohon disampaikan jawabannya. Jas apa Pak Arga yang bikin hangat?
Just be mine.
Just be mine. Selamat Pak Arga, jawaban Anda betul. Anda akan dihubungi oleh panitia untuk mendapatkan hadiah token yang sangat menarik. Baik, pertanyaan terakhir atau kuis terakhir. Oke. Apa perbedaan matahari dan bulan? Apa perbedaan matahari dan bulan? Silakan 10 detik dari sekarang. Apa perbedaan matahari dan bulan? Apa perbedaan matahari dan bulan? Ibu Shanet, mohon dibuka mikrofonnya dan membacakan jawabannya. Apa perbedaan matahari dan bulan? Silakan.
Kalau matahari ada diskonnya.
Iya, betul sekali, Bu Shanet. Tuh, kita kaum pencinta diskon. Terima kasih Bu Shanet, Ibu akan dihubungin selanjutnya oleh pihak panitia untuk mendapatkan hadiah token menarik. Baik, terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Sepertinya suasana sudah hangat dan sudah saatnya it is time untuk acara selanjutnya, merupakan agenda terakhir di seminar hari ini. We will have a panel discussion, and for this panel discussion, I would like to hand over this seminar, the host, to our colleague, Pak Yuliansyah, who is the business advisor in ECC and who will also be the moderator for this panel discussion. With this, Pak Yuliansyah, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Mbak Lia, audio check, apakah suara saya terdengar dengan jelas?
Sedikit breaking, boleh dicek sound lagi Pak Yuliansyah?
Audio check, apakah sudah jelas?
Sudah baik, silakan Pak Yuliansyah.
Oke, terima kasih Mbak Lia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang saya hormati Ibu Meti, Pak Roni, dan jajaran IPA, our honorable guest, Ibu Zoe, Pak Teguh, Pak Haider. Terima kasih sudah memberikan paparan mengenai apa itu anti money laundering. Dan saya mau lapor nih ke Bu Meti. Jadi kalau tadi Bu Meti di awal saya quote menyatakan bahwa salah satu tujuan dari sesi ini adalah memastikan semua orang itu paham mengenai apa itu money laundering atau pencucian uang. Nah, saya mau tick the box nih, Bu Meti, bahwa saya sekarang sudah memahami apa itu pencucian uang. Jadi sekarang saya ngerti anti pencucian itu bukan artinya ketika uang saya itu ketinggalan di celana atau dompet ketinggalan di celana terus kecuci. Jadi ini lebih luas dari hanya sekadar uang saya kecuci di laundry atau cuci sama si Mbak. Jadi memang ini suatu hal yang lebih luas dari masalah tersebut. Dan alhamdulillah hari ini kita sudah kedatangan Ibu Zoe, patutnya akan berdiskusi dengan kita lebih jauh untuk mengenai apa itu tindak pidana pencucian uang. Ibu Zoe, I would like to excuse myself to use a mixed language in this part. I will use English and Bahasa in the same time, so bear with us and hope that we can have a good discussions. Oke, kita tentunya ini sesuatu hal yang sangat baik dari IPA, mensponsori adanya diskusi mengenai tindak pidana pencucian uang. Kalau tadi saya quote Pak Haider dan Pak Teguh, bahwa memang tindak pidana pencucian uang ini mungkin sedikit tidak tercover atau tidak terdistribusikan informasinya lebih jauh, lebih banyak membahas mengenai suap dan korupsi. Namun ini bukan berarti bahwa hal ini tidak mempunyai dampak negatif ke bisnis. Oleh karena itu kita semua di sini mungkin ada yang baru paham, newbie, contohnya kayak saya nih, 4. Mudah-mudahan nanti di akhir sesi ini kita bisa naik ke 5 dan semoga teman-teman di sini yang hadir juga bisa mendapatkan informasi yang lebih baik. Nah, sebelum kita lanjutkan panel diskusi, ada beberapa hal yang saya sampaikan, terutama kepada peserta di sini mengenai sesi Q&A. Nanti kita akan bagi sesinya, ada sesi dari live questions, jadi silakan Pak Ibu untuk angkat tangan, nanti tim akan meng-unmute, dan silakan hidupkan kamera, silakan sampaikan pertanyaannya, kita batasi dulu 2 pertanyaan, nanti habis itu ada pertanyaan dari live chat, jadi silakan tuliskan pertanyaan Bapak Ibu juga di chat, nanti kita akan tanya, dan silakan feel free to put your questions in Bahasa, and I will try to help to translate the question in English so Ibu Zoe will be able to provide her responses. Perkenan saya ingin share screen dulu, jadi untuk memandu adanya diskusi ini, saya memiliki beberapa pertanyaan yang mungkin teman-teman di sini juga punya pertanyaan yang sama. Nah, tadi awal kita sudah bahas mengenai apa itu AML, we have discussed about what is AML, what are the impacts, and I just would like to bring it to the earlier stage of the sessions. Perhaps some of the who attended this meeting is just joining the call to discuss about what is actually the value of having the ML risk management in the business. So, jadi apa sih sebenarnya yang menjadi nilai buat bisnis dalam mengelola risiko money laundering? So I will open the floor for Ibu Zoe, Pak Teguh, Pak Khalid to provide your feedback. Apa sih sebenarnya value dari memiliki ini dan apa istilahnya what's in it for us, terutama bagi kami yang bergerak di area risk management ataupun compliance. Saya persilakan Ibu Zoe. You want to start, Bu Zoe?
Certainly, thank you. Okay, so in this regard, what is the actual value to the business on having AML risk management? I think from what I've gleaned so far from presentations and from the sharing of participants, most companies will already have some sort of a risk management in place, whether it's against corruption or bribery or other types of crimes like fraud, etc. So having a broader risk management framework on money laundering will actually be able to capture the whole gamut of predicate crimes that are associated with an industry. It opens up the opportunity for you to have a closer look at the industry and see what other types of crimes may be prevalent, what other types of crimes what your industry has, what vulnerabilities, exist in your industry to other types of crimes. But also, it's important to remember that in the laundering of the proceeds of crime, in money laundering, it is those predicate crimes that first take place, and then it is the process of laundering those proceeds, taking it through to the end steps of money laundering, where we had the placement, layering, and integration. So criminals will be looking at the whole aspect, at the whole process. They'll be gaining ill-gotten gains from their criminal activities, and they will want to push it through the placement and layering and integration process in order to enjoy the fruits of their criminal enterprise or their criminal activities. So to that extent, when you have AML risk management, you're really looking at your industry or your company in a more holistic way, seeing it from A to Z in terms of the points of vulnerability and risks. For example, trade-based money laundering, the risk of that in oil and gas industry, in the aspect of like shipping, transportation, and import, export. So it's one component, but AML can actually see the whole thing. Having AML risk management within your companies as well will align you better with your national expectations. So, your government's expectations on the anti-money laundering framework. So to have something in place that covers off on all of the anti-money laundering components of your national AML regime is also, of course, beneficial to your company, to your industry, and ultimately to your country. So I'll start off with that.
Thank you, Ibu Zoe, for your feedback. Pak Khalid, Pak Haidir, how is your view on this?
Kalau view saya, mungkin saya pakai bahasa Indonesia ya, gitu.
Silakan,
Mungkin
Pak Khalid.
Yang pertama-tama untuk punya manajemen resiko di pencucian uang, mengenai pencucian uang ini bisa terlihat gitu Pak ya. Semuanya tahu tentang korupsi, semua tahu tentang penipuan, tentang penggelapan, semua yang merupakan hal tersebut. Akan tetapi bagaimana pencucian uang itu berjalan. Contohnya gini, saya sangat kaget, jujurnya sangat hebat, maksudnya IPA ini yang ikut tuh sampai 70 lebih gitu ya. Berarti dengan adanya manajemen risiko di perusahaannya, mereka mau mengetahui, pingin tahu pencucian uang itu seperti apa. Pencucian uang itu sebenarnya straightforward, ada satu pidana, terus menghasilkan uang dari pidana itu, terus dicuci lah ya, maksudnya untuk dijadikan sesuatu yang legal gitu. Resiko itu yang pertama adalah dengan ada manajemen risiko, kita sebagai pelaku yang di dalam perusahaan, maksudnya employee-nya, pingin tahu itu resikonya seperti apa, pencucian uang itu seperti apa, itu nomor satu. Kedua, yang paling penting, gimana kita menghadapi ternyata ada, kita sebagai lawyer ya dari pihak luar yang melihat ini, resikonya buat kita tuh apa sih gitu. Resikonya nggak selalu, itu yang saya bilang di awal. Untuk oil and gas, Ibu Zoe tadi udah bilang di trade-nya itu mungkin bisa terjadi pencucian uang yang dilakukan company oil and gas itu sendiri. Tapi kita juga melihat bahwa yang lebih menyakitkan adalah kita tidak melakukan apa-apa, tapi proyek kita disita. Proyek kita disita karena ada kontraktor kita kayak atau siapa itu yang melakukan pencucian uang. Ada mungkin prediksi. Yang lebih parah lagi udah disita, delay bisnis tersebut. Yang lebih parah lagi masuk media, lebih parah lagi karena bisnisnya tidak berjalan, ya berarti harus terminasi karyawan, harus bla bla. Itu impactnya tuh cukup kemana-mana gitu. Jadi mengenai pencucian ini menurut saya cukup penting diketahui dan cukup bukan penting aja, merupakan salah satu fundamental yang perlu diketahui oleh perusahaan sih.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih Pak Halid. Jadi ternyata dampaknya bisa seserius itu ya Pak mengenai pencucian uang ya.
Betul Pak. Biasanya kalau ada korupsi atau fraud gitu, biasanya nanti surat panggilannya ditempelin tuh Pak, korupsi oleh si A gitu, yang melakukan ini biasanya corruption and money laundering gitu, ada pasal berlapis lah seperti itu biasanya.
Oke, baik. Wow. Berarti mungkin ini jadi kayak semacam eye opener buat kita semua di sesi ini bahwa proceedings dari tindakan korupsi itu bisa berbentuk pencucian uang, bahkan dampaknya bisa menjadi masalah buat bisnis ya, Pak. Sampai ada penyitaan, mungkin kalau ada karyawan terlibat karena memang tidak melaksanakan tugasnya, bisa ada hukuman kurungan dan macam-macam. Tentunya kita semua di sini akan berusaha untuk mencegah hal tersebut terjadi di sektor energi. Pak Teguh, ada yang mau ditambahkan, Pak Teguh?
Dari saya mungkin cukup, Pak.
Baiklah, terima kasih. Nah, saya mau kembali ke satu pertanyaan tadi Ibu Shanet yang bertanya mengenai due diligence. Saya tahu tadi pembahasan terutama Pak Khalid dan Pak Teguh membahas cukup detail mengenai due diligence. Zoe also touch this in some of her explanations about due diligence. Nah, Pak Teguh, I'm aware that you have mentioned earlier that US and UK-based company may potentially have a better due diligence, but let's put it in the local landscape, especially for Indonesia dan kami semua di sektor energi ini. Sebenarnya apa sih yang mengenai due diligence itu? Apakah sudah cukup due diligence doang? Lalu gimana kita bisa tahu bahwa ini bisa cukup? Dan ada hal lain nggak yang bisa dilakukan selain due diligence untuk memperkuat usaha dalam pencucian uang? Saya mulai dari Pak Teguh, nanti Ibu Zoe and Pak Halid may add your view on this. Silakan Pak Teguh.
Oke, terima kasih Pak. Jadi mungkin kalau saya berangkatnya memang dari aspek legal kali ya Pak ya. Jadi kalau kita melihat ketiga pasal yang memungkinkan dikenakan pidana di Undang-Undang Pencucian Uang, itu unsurnya ada unsur sengaja atau patut diduga. Selalu ada kata itu. Nah, jadi gimana caranya kita terus bisa membela diri kita kalau kita diperiksa oleh penyidik bahwa tidak ada unsur kesengajaan atau unsur patut diduganya itu bisa kita patahkan gitu. Nah, itu menurut saya itu fungsinya kenapa kita company harus melaksanakan salah satunya due diligence untuk menunjukkan bahwa company memang sudah melakukan upaya yang terbaik untuk memprevent supaya tidak disusupi oleh tindakan-tindakan pidana. Contohnya salah satunya adalah anti money laundering. Nah, memang mengenai mungkin sejauh apanya, sebagaimana saya sampaikan tadi, memang belum ada standarnya gitu. Tapi memang contoh-contoh yang mungkin memang kadang-kadang akhirnya baliknya ke apa yang masuk akal dan apa ya upaya yang terbaik yang sudah dilakukan. Memang biasanya standarnya bicaranya akhirnya di situ gitu ya. Jadi contohnya kalau kita mendue company, tentunya kan kita mesti make sure company itu memang valid didirikan, license-nya semuanya valid, terus juga bisnisnya jelas gitu ya, sehingga bisa di-qualify bahwa apapun yang dihasilkan dari perusahaan itu memang legal gitu. Mungkin sampai saat ini mungkin di Indonesia levelnya masih di situ ya, dan saya rasa untuk tataran Indonesia itu sudah cukup untuk saat ini. Mungkin ke depannya akan berubah ya dengan mengingat perkembangan EML terutama di UK dan di Amerika. Sebagai mungkin saya merefer ke contoh yang tadi saya sampaikan, itu kebetulan kita bantu klien kita untuk transaksi merger and acquisition di situ, di mana threshold-nya UK itu tinggi sekali, di mana kalau company-nya mau nyaplok perusahaan yang diduga ketika dia mendapatkan izin-izinnya pun ada dugaan tindak pidana, itu maka company yang mencaploknya bisa dihukum. Jadi threshold mereka nggak cukup melihat bahwa on paper semuanya itu memang valid, semuanya itu legitimate gitu, tapi harus ada upaya pengecekan lebih lanjut untuk make sure bahwa apa yang kelihatan valid itu memang benar-benar valid gitu. Kayaknya dari bahasanya udah ngejelimet ya, tapi itulah faktanya yang terjadi dan mungkin suatu saat Indonesia pun akan bergerak ke arah sana gitu ya.
Okay, thank you. We welcome Ibu Putri to the panel, and I would like to ask the same question to Ibu Zoe from your experience and your observations, Ibu Zoe. Perhaps you can shed some lights in these questions about the questions whether our due diligence is enough. What is enough in due diligence? What is your view on that, Ibu?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Is due diligence alone enough? I think due diligence is probably the crux or the center of the key element when you're onboarding customers, or you're looking at your stakeholders in that light. But I think there are other elements under money laundering that can be applied as well, or that can be utilized. Looking into beneficial information or ownership information, looking more closely at legal arrangements with companies that you're involved in, or they're coming in to invest or are part of your contracted network. Looking against politically exposed persons lists, understanding their role and the vulnerabilities and risks that are inherent to their involvement in the business. I think those are some of the other elements that you can certainly look to. I think if you look at the FATF 40 recommendations, there's some key elements for a money laundering regime there that can help the private sector, at the company level, to have a look at what other elements they can include as part of their own anti-money laundering program. Apart from that, looking at the external components, I think it's also important to pay attention to your internal controls in relation to money laundering. Making sure that you have dedicated AML staff, that you understand the risks and vulnerabilities, from an internal perspective, that you have training programs for staff, so that there's a good understanding of money laundering and the predicate crimes that your company, your industry regularly face. And then to have independent testing of your money laundering programs as well, to ensure their robustness or their strength against the vulnerabilities and risks that they're faced with. So I think that would be my response, and I invite my colleague Putri, of course, to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Zoe. Ibu Putri, anything that you would like to add, Ibu, please?
Yes, ya, terima kasih Mas Yuliansa. Jadi memang Zoe sudah dan Pak Teguh tadi sudah menyampaikan ya kurang lebih, tapi saya mau menambahkan sedikit sebenarnya namanya pencucian uang dan illicit financial flow itu dia saling terkait. Jadi kalau illicit financial flow-nya itu adalah si predicate crime, jadi uangnya gitu ya, proceed of crime-nya. Money laundering adalah bagaimana cara dia menggerakkan atau memindahkan si proceed of crime ini. Nah, sebenarnya untuk mencegah dan mendisrupt sebenarnya illicit financial flow itu sebenarnya sudah dilakukan juga sama Bapak dan Ibu mungkin ya, terkait kepatuhan. Jadi kalau kita lihat, kita punya 3 prinsip terkait pencegahan illicit financial flow itu. Pertama adalah integrity, yang kedua adalah transparency, yang ketiga itu adalah accountability. Dan ada 5 praktek sebenarnya, praktek baik yang bisa dilakukan oleh Bapak dan Ibu untuk mencegah pencucian uang adalah pertama, menetapkan kebijakan yang jelas, konkret, dan up to date. Jadi dilakukan updating jika ditemukan risiko-risiko baru gitu, dan juga mitigasi plan terkait risiko tersebut misalnya. Terus yang kedua adalah tadi masalah due diligence, bahwa perusahaan melakukan effective due diligence according to risk-based level gitu ya. Jadi perusahaan harus secara jujur sebenarnya menilai resiko-resiko money laundering di dalam bisnis prosesnya. Jadi penilaian resikonya juga dilakukan secara jujur supaya nanti mitigation plan-nya juga bisa diterapkan sesuai. Dan begitu juga due diligence level-nya mungkin juga bisa disesuaikan untuk mencegah pencucian uangnya. Kemudian menciptakan culture of integrity melalui pelatihan atau insentif gitu ya. Jadi bahwa dan saya yakin ini juga sudah dilakukan ya untuk di sektor oil and gas karena memang terkait ABC compliance policy-nya juga ketat kan. Terus yang kemudian foster a speak up culture. Nah, ini juga sebenarnya akan berpengaruh pada whistleblowing system internal gitu ya. Karena misalnya bisa aja sebenarnya dari pegawai itu menerima request gitu ya pembayaran, misalnya ada invoice tapi ada terima request pembayarannya ke 3 rekening yang berbeda gitu. Terus kalau tidak mengerti mengenai rezim pencucian uang, hal itu akan diokekan saja karena mereka melihat bahwa itu berarti kebijakan penerima uang untuk menerima uangnya secara terpisah. Tapi di sisi lain, di balik itu sebenarnya mungkin si seller, maksudnya bahwa kita mau membayar uang yang penagih invoice itu sebenarnya sedang melakukan pencucian uang melalui layer 3 rekening itu. Jadi sebenarnya itu adalah hal-hal yang bisa disampaikan melalui pelatihan dan updating mengingatkan kebijakan itu setiap tahunnya. Terus kemudian adalah kolaborasi di antara bisnis atau perusahaan di misalnya IPA ini. Jadi bahwa peer learning gitu ya mengenai untuk mitigasi resiko-risiko. Misalnya ada satu perusahaan dia menemukan risiko yang baru ditemukan di perusahaannya, mungkin bisa di-sharing ke rekan perusahaan yang lain bahwa ternyata resiko ini ada di terkait money laundering ini juga ada gitu di sektor oil and gas, dan juga bisa sharing bagaimana mitigasi resikonya. Dan ini mungkin juga mungkin semua gatekeepers ya yang berada di yang bekerja di sektor oil and gas seperti akuntan, advisor, lawyers gitu ya. Itu juga atau notaris juga perlu aware gitu ya dalam membantu oil and gas company dalam melakukan transaksinya, due diligence atau apapun, juga perlu aware dengan risiko-risiko ini. Gitu aja Mas, makasih banyak.
Terima kasih Bu Putri atas feedback-nya. Jadi kita akan sekarang masuk ke floor, kami persilahkan. Tadi saya mendapat informasi Ibu Meiti, silakan Ibu Meiti. Maaf Ibu, masih mute Bu.
Oke, ya, baru tadi di mute mungkin oleh operator. Yang saya mau tanya begini, oke, saya paham ya, dan ini bagus sekali konsepnya ya. Yang saya mau nanya, mungkin saya nanyanya lebih kepada teman-teman, tapi juga mungkin kepada Pak Khalid maupun Pak Teguh yang banyak berkecimpung di oil and gas ya. Dalam hal pengadaan misalnya, jadi dalam kita memilih vendor kita, ya, kan ini ada aturan yang dibuat oleh SKK Migas. Seandainya K3S ini menambahkan faktor due diligence untuk money laundering-nya tadi ya, apakah peraturan yang sekarang diberlakukan di PTK itu mengizinkan kita untuk masukkan? Sehingga bolehkah kita mendisqualify perusahaan yang kita curigai ada money laundering-nya? Jadi dia nggak boleh ikut tender kita. Karena kan kita diatur, nggak bisa memasukkan tambahan-tambahan evaluasi ya yang di luar peraturan. Nah, mungkin saya nanya ke teman-teman nih maupun kepada dua narasumber, gimana peraturan yang sekarang mendukung atau tidak mendukung gitu?
Terima kasih Bu Meti. Silakan Pak Khalid, Pak Teguh.
Iya Bu, kalau mendukung sih Bu, kita membaca peraturannya, tetapi kalau dibilang kita harus menambahkan Bu, gitu mungkin kita harus ngomong sama government-nya, SKK Migas atau seperti apa ya Bu. Cuman menurut kami sih misalkan di proses tendernya Bu gitu, mungkin kita bisa menyelipkan hal seperti money laundering, clause atau something seperti itu Bu. Karena ini kan kembali lagi Bu, apa namanya, atau pada saat pemilihan tersebut, pemilihan pemenangnya, kita melakukan interview yang berkaitan dengan money laundering gitu Bu. Memang tidak bisa dirubah menurut saya, dan kalau mensupport secara langsung sih belum ya Bu ya gitu maksudnya, tetapi sudah ada basic-basicnya sih Bu untuk di situ.
Sedikit tambahan lagi Pak, sampai sejauh mana kita baru curiga bahwa dia ada money laundering atau kita mesti buktikan secara hukum bahwa dia itu memang terlibat money laundering, karena itu kalau sampai saat itu berat sekali. Tetapi kalau hanya berdasarkan curiga, saya yakin perusahaan itu akan protes ke SKK Migas kenapa dia didisqualify gitu loh Pak. Jadi maksud saya ini, saya udah ngomong pelaksanaannya ya, kan tadi diharapkan kita harus begini. Pelaksanaannya itu yang kami juga mau tahu gimana to get there gitu loh.
Iya, mungkin gini Bu, kalau kita basicnya kecurigaan, kita mempunyai bukti apa, jadi kita nggak usah sampai dia terlaporkan gitu ya Bu, kan bukti-bukti itu harus kita kumpulkan. Contohnya Bu, gini, saya mungkin balik sedikit ke bagian due diligence itu deh Bu, gitu. Misalkan pas lagi tender kita mau due diligence, ada advice dari saya gitu, biasanya pada saat due diligence kan biasanya tuh perusahaan apapun gitu akan kirimkan suatu sheet gitu yang harus diisi bahwa siapa shareholdernya bla 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 something kayak gitu, agak panjang tuh Bu. Nah habis itu dia udah jawab, kita cuma cek desk review doang, desk research doang, terus udah oh ini oke nih kayaknya tidak ada apa-apa gitu. Nah kalau saya memastikannya lagi gitu, ini belum ngomong mereka punya money laundry atau tidak, itu harus ada interview khusus berkaitan compliance, meaningnya anti bribery, anti money laundering, anti competition, bla bla bla, di mana itu timnya berbeda. Timnya ada dari legal, timnya ada dari finance team, timnya ada compliance, terus dari board director juga ada. Kenapa? Beberapa waktu itu ada berapa lagi tim. Cuman gini Bu, kenapa saya bilang di belakangnya itu penting ada mereka. Finance itu mempunyai dilatih dan dididik untuk keep the money. Ada sense psikologisnya seperti itu. Compliance ada sense sama legal. Sama legal biasanya ada sense protektif gitu. Maksudnya curiga terus, ada seperti kayak gitu-gitunya. Jadi pertanyaannya itu nanti akan berbeda. Mungkin level-level pembuktiannya misalkan kayak SKK Migas gitu. Mungkin dari pertama surat itu yang pertanyaan apa kayak lampiran form itu bahwa ini mencurigakan. Dari form itu kita naik lagi bahwa oh ini kemungkinan apa namanya shareholdernya ini agak kita tidak tahu shareholdernya siapa, atau waktu dia jawab source of fund of to use capital atau untuk bisnis ini dia nggak bilang banks atau dia bilang ada maksud dia jawabnya bank biasanya yang kita lihat nih Bu, contoh bank X gitu, dari bank X, tapi amount dia masukin untuk project ini misalkan 2.000 perak, tapi proyek ini 1 miliar gitu atau seperti apa gitu, berarti dia ada sedikit bohong di bagian situ. Kemungkinan quote and quote ada bohongnya gitu Bu. Nah itu bukti pertama. Bukti kedua, bukti interview. Kita tidak bisa memaksa SKK Migas untuk apa namanya, oh kita harus disqualified itu. Tapi dengan bukti-bukti ini kayaknya kita memang harus fight dan mengirimkan surat resmi lah Bu, bahwa berdasarkan assessment kita adalah A, B, C ini semuanya termasuk interview, ini cukup ada potensi yang kami takutkan bahwa ini source of money-nya tidak kita ketahui, atau background orang ini pernah omnya pas lagi kita itu omnya dari direkturnya pernah kena corruptionnya, kita juga lihat gitu ya, proyeknya 1 triliun tapi corruptionnya 1 miliar. Ya itu bukan kita curigai, dia belum tentu mampu juga untuk proyek ini. Seperti itu sih Bu biasanya.
Oke Pak, ini keterangan Bapak sih berguna ya Pak ya. Cuman saya terus terang belum convince bahwa kita akan bisa melalui jalan itu, karena kita kan sangat ditentukan oleh aturan di SKK Migas. kalau aturan di sana itu justru yang memberi kita jalan ini, saya tenang lah Pak, bisa lah itu gitu. Kalau enggak jadi kita fighting kanan dan fighting kiri, termasuk fighting government.
Betul Bu, memang sayangnya sih harus terjadi seperti itu sih Bu.
Oke Pak, makasih.
Iya Bu.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Meti. Kita juga ada Pak Hendri, ini sudah raise hand. Silakan Pak Hendri.
Halo, apakah suara saya bisa didengar?
Terdengar Pak Hendri, silakan Pak.
Oke, baik. Mungkin concern saya tadi agak mirip juga dengan Ibu yang tadi yang bertanya. Ini ke narasumber, saya sebenarnya lebih concern kepada source of fund dalam suatu, khususnya di industri oil and gas ya, di mana kalau kita punya capital investment itu cukup besar, apalagi kalau kita bicara M&A proses atau mungkin kita bicara development suatu project yang menggunakan yang nilainya berkisar ratusan juta. Nah, tentunya tadi dalam proses pengadaan tadi memang agak susah bagi kita pada saat melakukan due diligence atau background check itu mengecek source of fund-nya. Nah, apalagi tadi ada narasumber mengatakan kalau diduga dana yang digunakan itu adalah dana money laundry, maka dampaknya bisa proyeknya di stop atau disita dan sebagainya. Nah, pertanyaannya adalah apakah saya melihat kalau due diligence itu atau background checks yang kita lakukan di Indonesia, local company itu lebih kepada surface-nya saja, di mukanya saja, kurang dalam gitu ya kalau saya lihat. Ada nggak suatu lembaga yang mengeluarkan semacam sertifikasi atau license bahwa orang-orang ini atau company-company ini mereka clear gitu atau bersih, sehingga kita sebagai project owner atau kita yang mau menjual suatu aset atau participating interest itu lebih secure gitu posisinya. Mungkin itu pertanyaan saya.
Terima kasih Pak Hendri. Silakan Pak Halid, Pak Teguh.
Iya, kalau mungkin lembaga yang spesifik saya belum pernah dengar terus terang ya Pak ya. Tapi kalau mungkin saya bisa share yang biasanya kita lakukan aja Pak. Jadi yang biasanya kita lakukan itu salah satunya biasanya pengecekan background dari pemilik dan juga company-nya, bekerja sama dengan kita sebutnya private investigator Pak. Jadi ada beberapa lembaga di Indonesia juga ada Pak. Itu memang yang mereka punya spesialisasinya mengecek hal-hal seperti ini. Dan dari pengalaman kita sih pengecekannya itu kita mungkin bisa bilang cukup canggih ya Pak ya. Jadi hal-hal sampai kadang flow of fund dan segala macam itu bisa ketahuan oleh mereka. Dan mereka ini melakukannya itu dengan cara-cara yang legal. Seperti apa yang saya terus terang tidak tahu Pak, tapi biasanya hasil dari pemeriksaan mereka ini juga bisa kita pakai kalau kita ada dispute di pengadilan misalnya gitu. Jadi biasanya kita selalu suggest terutama kalau klien punya kecurigaan atau ada red flag terkait satu company, di mana mungkin kalau hanya desktop preset saja semuanya nggak kelihatan, biasanya kita suggest untuk lebih jauh dengan meng-hire private investigator seperti ini. Mungkin Pak Halid ada tambahan Pak Halid?
Ya, itu seperti yang Pak Teguh katakan tadi Pak gitu. Cuman itu yang saya bilang Bapak mungkin udah pada melakukan atau belum gitu. Yang saya bilang membuat tim untuk bukan investigasi, interview itu cukup efektif Pak. Kadang-kadang gini, walaupun ada tim tersebut semuanya memakai naluri di hati ya Pak gitu, maksudnya oh ini bagus, ini enggak atau gitu maksudnya, tetapi interview face to face seperti itu gitu, terus kita bahas satu persatu, ini dananya benar, dari mana aja kalian, ini proyeknya misalkan $1 juta, kalian kan di awal-awal pasti sebelum kita membayar sebagai owner of the project-nya, kalian kan harus ngeluarin duit, itu duit dari mana, bla 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 seperti itu. Biasanya cara menjawab mereka kalau ada apa-apa itu bisa suka ketahuan gitu Pak, bukan ketahuan gimana ya, ada dari perspektif finance yang pikir oh ini nggak masuk di akal, perspektif legal, perspektif semua gitu. Selain private investigator, saya juga sarankan untuk ada interview one on one dengan tim khusus yang membahas berkaitan dengan compliance, Pak, gitu. Jadi bisa dan itu biasanya nanti yang dikirim kadang-kadang direktur utamanya kadang-kadang banyak yang nggak tahu apa-apa gitu, malah pelintat-pelintut pas lagi jawabnya, atau project manajernya aja yang tidak mengetahui berkaitan dengan apa namanya project itu atau tentang keuangannya gitu. Dia cuma tahu tentang teknisnya doang, bla bla bla. Nah kalau sampai direkturnya nggak datang, udah pisah-pisah tuh, jadi kita harus bilang datang semua kalian karena saya mau nanya gitu. Seperti itu biasanya nanti kita bisa tahu tuh Pak, bukan tahu lah, secara profesionalisme kita yang kita jalankan ada kecurigaannya. Nah baru bisa pakai private investigator itu juga Pak di belakangnya.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Halid, Pak Teguh, Pak Henry, mudah-mudahan menjawab. So we would like to go to the chat box. There's a question from Pak Monang Tampu Bolon. Pardon me if it is female, pardon me. And considering that most money laundering crimes are normal acts carried by corruptors or criminals, so why is there an additional sentence for this action? This is the philosophy. So I would like to start with Ibu Zoe or Ibu Putri from UNODC. What is your view or takes on these questions?
Zoe, you can go first. I will add.
Thank you, Putri. Yes, I think it's a very interesting question, and thank you for asking it. I think in relation to the philosophy as to why there's an additional sentence to these predicate crimes and that's associated with money laundering, the philosophy really goes back to, again, the money laundering stages and the enjoyment of the criminals, ill-gotten gains. So criminals are motivated to conduct their crime, to take the risks in conducting crime in order to benefit and profit. And ultimately, that benefit and that profit will not just sit in a place and just sit there. The criminal will want to access it, will want to enjoy the proceeds of their crime, whether it's through, fast cars, real estate, investment, paying for their children's education fees, whatever the end motivation is, the satisfaction that they get out of it. So the philosophy behind putting in additional measures, such as, through money laundering legislation, that doesn't just look at, punishing the crime, but also taking away the proceeds and those assets associated with that crime in the first place. The philosophy is there to stop, to curb, to prevent that motivation and, to stop it there. It's to take away the motivation of the criminals to continue or to embark on their criminal acts. So that would be the philosophy behind it. I hope that made sense. Thank you. And Putri, over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. Jadi memang itu nampaknya ini seperti double-double ya, Bu. Tapi sebenarnya filosofi di balik itu adalah pada saat tindak pidana itu diketahui bahwa uang itu sebenarnya sudah terbang ke benua yang lain, ke negara yang lain. Jadi kecepatan penegak hukum untuk mengejar hasil tindak pidana yang disebutkan oleh Zoe itu biasanya terlambat. Nah, anti-money laundering measures ini sebenarnya memandatkan negara yang menerima sebenarnya illicit financial flow itu yang masuk ke dalam negara mereka untuk berjaga-jaga dan lebih selektif dalam menerima uang yang masuk. Jadi kalau ada uang yang masuk dan dicurigai bahwa ini adalah ill-gotten gains, maka aset itu akan dibekukan. Maka biasanya out of court confiscation ya, yang bisa dilakukan oleh kepolisian dan PPATK jika ditemukan ada uang yang memang dicurigai hasil tindak pidana dan tidak ada seorang pun yang mengaku bahwa itu adalah uang mereka yang masuk ke rekening di sebuah perbankan. Maka polisi dan atau PPATK bisa langsung menyita dan merampas uang itu. Jadi itu adalah filosofi di balik itu, bahwa kalau hasil tindak pidana yang aktif adalah negara yang dirugikan dari misalnya ada korupsi dan itu negara yang dirugikan, tapi anti money laundering lebih ke negara di mana tujuan uang itu masuk gitu. Jadi pencegahan kejahatan atau respon terhadap kejahatan bisa dilaksanakan lebih cepat gitu. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih. So summarize conclusions, I would say that why there is additional sentences in regards to that crime proceeding is to deter or stop the actual crime to be continued and make a larger impact to the society. Dan saya ingin mengundang dari ada Ibu Chandra. Silakan Ibu Chandra.
Terima kasih, Mas Juliansa. So I'd like to address my questions to both Ibu Zuhi and Mbak Putri team, and also Pak Khalid and Mas Teguh. Your views, or do you have any experience on a money laundering case in a PSC block licensing or tender round? So globally or Indonesia, should there be any possibility or any risk that the one holding the hot money to use it to have a block in one country, because we know when we participating in the tender block, we have to put a commitment. So the money that the investor would like to pay for the firm commitment is based on the hot money. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Sorry. Go on.
Yes, please, Ibu Zoe.
Thank you for the question. I think the nature of your question is quite operational. I think you're seeking to see whether or not there's an experience there that we can share in light of that. And for me, from UNODC, we don't, I don't have the operational experience behind that. But I will defer to Putri, my colleague, who prior to joining the UNODC was with another agency in Indonesia, which was much more operational. So perhaps there's something that you can share from your time with that agency, Putri. Over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. Ibu Chandra, mohon izin saya mengklarifikasi pertanyaan. Maksudnya ini masalah terkait saat tender block ya?
Lelang wilayah kerja, Mbak Putri.
Sorry?
Lelang wilayah kerja, betul.
Ya, lelang wilayah kerja. Ya, memang kalau di Indonesia saya tidak punya informasi secara langsung, tetapi saya mengetahui sebenarnya berdasarkan hasil riset. Jadi kalau tadi Zoe cerita tentang APG ada di Asia Pasifik, ini adalah riset dari FATF style FTBR, the FATF style organization di West Africa. Organisasi ini melakukan riset terkait money laundering and terrorist financing linked to the extractive industry or mining sector. Salah satu kasus yang menjadi tipologi mereka adalah mengenai akuisisi blok minyak di Nigeria. Dan ini sebenarnya juga karena kegagalan, menurut saya, kegagalan due diligence yang efektif, maka posisinya jadi blok minyak ini sebelumnya dikuasai oleh sebuah perusahaan yang beneficial owner-nya adalah mantan menteri perminyakan di Nigeria. Nah, blok minyak ini kemudian diakuisisi oleh Shell dan ENI, dan kemudian hasil penjualannya itu masuk ke mantan menteri dan other government official. Jadi ini adalah bentuk apa ya? Kemudian menjadi red flag ya, menjadi kasus di sana bahwa apakah ini merupakan sebuah suap gitu ya, atau sebenarnya adalah transaksi bisnis yang normal. Nah, ini adalah bentuk resiko sebenarnya, mulai dari resiko nama baik, resiko tadi masalah pemeriksaan dan lain-lain yang mungkin tidak terjadi di Afrika, tapi mungkin di US ya, karena atau di tempat dari mana Shell atau ENI berasal, karena anti money laundering regime-nya lebih kuat. Begitu, Bu.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Putri, Ibu Zoe. Jadi memang ada risiko, itu ada ya, risiko risiko money laundering, pencucian uang atau suap di dalam kegiatan lelang wilayah kerja. Di Indonesia belum tercatat kasusnya, mudah-mudahan tidak ada, mudah-mudahan tim dari DNV juga tidak mengkonfirmasi ada kasus serupa, tetapi pernah ada kasus di Nigeria. Barangkali ada tambahan dari Pak Khalid atau Pak Teguh?
Kalau dari kami juga belum pernah dengar, Bu, kalau di Indonesia. Jadi mungkin contoh yang Mbak Putri angkat itu salah satu contoh yang memang perlu diwaspadai ya, bahwa mungkin saja terjadi. Yang kami pernah dengar sih sebenarnya dan ini juga bukan di Indonesia, sekali lagi di UK, Serious Fraud Office pernah menghukum terkait masalah procurement di bidang oil and gas itu. Tapi untuk yang pertanyaan spesifik Ibu di Indonesia kami belum pernah dengar, Bu.
Baik, terima kasih untuk jawabannya, Pak Teguh.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Chandra. Saya membuka kesempatan buat rekan-rekan di sini untuk bertanya baik secara live atau mengenai chat. Saya persilakan. Jika tidak ada, saya punya mungkin final questions dari saya untuk sesi kita pada sore hari ini. Ini untuk semua panel. Jadi setelah kita bahas tadi mengenai dampak, mengenai proses, kita bicara detail mengenai due diligence, saya ingin bertanya dan mendapatkan insight dari para panelis ini, apa sih yang menjadi critical success factor untuk kami, perusahaan-perusahaan yang bergerak di sektor energi, untuk bisa mengimplementasikan program anti-money laundering yang efektif. Kan, Ibu Zoe, Ibu Putri, you may start.
Thank you. All right. The critical success factors, I think we've touched on quite a few before in terms of strengthening, companies' how do you say, response or preparation of AML risk mitigations. Practicing due diligence, some of the things that Khalid and Teguh mentioned as well in terms of perhaps changing some practices in the due diligence format when you're onboarding companies and people as well. But I think from my view anyway, from a broader perspective, I think it's important for the industry, for the energy sector, to keep abreast of current and emerging trends that are happening in your region and globally as well. Crime criminals do not see the borders, our land borders. They look for the loopholes in regulation and legislation between countries, between jurisdictions, in order to process their ill-gotten gains, their illicit financial flows. So it is important, that countries sort of look at their own risk and vulnerabilities, but also gauge them against the regions, against, bordering countries, as well as global. And I think if you have a sight on that and keep learning, and then keep integrating those learnings into your own processes and procedures, and sharing that information as an industry, as partners in this industry, and not forgetting sharing and building knowledge along with your government counterparts in the public sector, law enforcement, prosecutions, banking sector, AML compliance officers in the banking sector as well. I think that is what will be a critical success factor, or will contribute to critical success factors in AML risk mitigation in the industry here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panelists that would like to add or bring their view, please? Pak Khalid, Bu Putri, Pak Teguh.
Bu Putri, silakan Bu Putri.
Terima kasih Pak Khalid, mohon maaf ya Pak. Oke, tadi saya sebenarnya sudah sebutkan ada 3 prinsip. Pertama, integrity, kedua, transparansi, ketiga, akuntabilitas. Sebenarnya dalam proses mitigasi resiko ini kan biasanya diawali oleh identifikasi resiko. Nah, kejujuran ya, maksudnya bahwa kejujuran perusahaan dalam menilai, mengidentifikasi resiko itu penting sebenarnya. Karena biasanya, biasanya mengabaikan gitu ya resiko, atau resiko yang mungkin teridentifikasi yang sebelumnya mungkin slide hanya sedikit gitu ya, tapi kemudian itu bisa menjadi berkembang lebih besar. Nah, kejujuran untuk mengidentifikasi resiko adalah titik yang penting sebelum kita menjalankan program mitigasi resiko. Nah, kemudian sebenarnya yang saya banyak lihat adalah resiko konflik kepentingan. Ini adalah terkadang terabaikan dan memang sulit gitu ya kita bicara hubungan baik dan konflik kepentingan, tapi benar-benar menilai gitu ya level konflik kepentingan dalam setiap transaksi bisnis itu akan sangat membantu program mitigasi risiko, baik itu risiko korupsi ataupun money laundering. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bu Putri. Pak Khalid, Pak Teguh, your view please.
Iya, kalau saya mungkin sama sama Bu Zoe, tapi ada tambahan sedikit itu untuk menjadi sukses itu harus tone from the top gitu. Maksudnya dari CEO dari atas langsung ke bawah itu harus benar-benar melaksanakan ini juga gitu. Jangan biasa di tim compliance saja atau semua, tone from the top itu cukup penting. Terus apa namanya compliance program juga baik buat anti bribery, anti money laundering atau apapun itu, biasanya di company from the US, from other countries, dia try to push their own this is our standard anti compliance program. Itu juga nggak bisa, maksudnya harus disesuaikan dengan, kita punya Indonesia itu punya regulation sendiri, harus disesuaikan dengan itu, disesuaikan dengan kebudayaan juga gitu. Maksudnya tetap dalam ranah hukum dan compliance, tetapi harus direview sesuai dengan di mana perusahaan itu berdiri gitu, dan oil and gas-nya itu ada di mana. Terus training juga penting, training bukan dari atas sampai bawah, training dari atas dengan bahasa yang bagus. Ada yang sampai ke bawah gitu, kadang-kadang bahasanya itu berbeda cara kita menyampaikannya. Maksudnya lebih gampangan, lebih enteng. Know your employees, know your management, and when you do the training, choose the language that is very easy to absorb. Itu juga. Dan yang terakhir sih harus punya whistleblower system. Itu whistleblower system itu juga cukup penting untuk menjadi sukses, karena itu salah satu informasi yang cukup bisa reliable. Itu sih dari saya.
Terima kasih Pak Khalid. Pak Teguh, anything to add?
Iya, mungkin tambahan aja yang tadi Pak Khalid sampaikan itu memang mesti dilihat sebagai sesuatu yang continuous ya. Jadi memang prosesnya selalu dimulai dari satu risk assessment, terus di develop suatu program, ada training, ada monitoring dengan whistleblowing. Ketika ketemu sesuatu, prosesnya muter lagi. Jadi itu memang sesuatu yang living mechanism yang memang selalu harus ada, dan diharapkan dengan berjalannya waktu memang kondisinya akan improve dan lebih baik. Itu aja tambahan dari saya.
Baik, terima kasih. Saya melihat tidak ada lagi pertanyaan. Coba saya cek. Sejauh yang saya cek tidak ada lagi raise hand. Di chat box juga. Sebentar saya cek chat box. Juga tidak ada. Oleh karena itu mungkin kita bisa akhiri panel ini dengan saya memberikan sedikit kesimpulan dari apa yang sudah kita diskusikan cukup panas dalam 45 menit terakhir ini, bahwa yang pertama memang resiko AML ini nyata. Ibu Zoe, pardon, I will deliver the conclusion in Bahasa, but I will try to use some mixed language. Resiko AML ini nyata buat bisnis di Indonesia, terutama kita yang bergerak di sektor energi. Dampaknya juga tadi sudah disampaikan cukup memprihatinkan, mulai dari penyitaan aset, tidak bisa berbisnis, yang jelas sudah terbayang commercial loss, financial loss, employee terminations, dan ada banyak dampak yang bisa terjadi. Kalau kita melihat dalam mikro di sektor energi, juga dampaknya secara makro di Indonesia. Nah, oleh karena itu perlu ada usaha bersama kita di sini sebagai bagian dari IPA, perusahaan-perusahaan di sektor energi, bersama dengan teman-teman yang ada di UNODC untuk bagaimana kita bisa terus menumbuhkan kultur integritas. Tadi kalau saya boleh quote dari Ibu Putri, bahwa kultur integritas itu penting, bahwa ada prinsip-prinsip seperti integrity, transparansi, dan accountability mengenai proses itu semua. Terus keep track dengan perkembangan resiko, lalu juga melihat apa yang terjadi, mengevaluasi, dan juga menginternalisasi, mengintegrasikan proses resiko dan dampaknya terhadap bisnis. Dan tadi saya suka sekali yang dari Pak Khalid mengenai tone from the top, ini penting sekali. Saya yakin di sini ada banyak leaders di perusahaan masing-masing yang tugasnya juga bukan hanya mendeliver bisnis, tapi juga mendeliver bisnis dengan fungsi integritas yang baik, dan bisa menurunkan message tersebut sampai ke bawah, di mana semua pihak dapat memahami risiko ini lebih lanjut, dengan tujuan tadi yang dijelaskan oleh Bu Zoe, bahwa ini untuk mencegah terjadinya tindakan kejahatan lebih lanjut dan berdampak negatif ke semua. Dan mudah-mudahan sesi kita pada sore hari ini bisa bermanfaat. Sayang sekali waktunya terbatas. Mungkin next kita bisa rencanakan Q&A-nya 2-3 jam kali ya. Mungkin kalau perlu kita lakukannya di Bali atau di Balikpapan, Pak Roni gimana Pak? Setuju Pak? Bali? Mungkin tahun depan, mudah-mudahan pandemi sudah berakhir, kita bisa pergi ke Bali bareng-bareng. Dari saya cukup sekian, saya mau tutup dengan sebuah pantun, karena saya aslinya dari Sumatera. Petir bukan sembarang petir, petir menyambar rumah Simidah. Terima kasih bagi yang sudah hadir, mudah-mudahan ini semua menjadi berkah. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih semua.
Terima kasih
semuanya.
Terima kasih semua. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Terima
very
kasih.
much.
Take
Bye bye.
Terima kasih IPA.
Thank you Ibu Zoe, thank you Pak Heli. Terima
Thank
kasih
you.
semua.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Roni. Mungkin kita bisa kolaborasi lagi ke depannya ya Pak.
Terima kasih Bu Zui, Bu Putri. Senang, jadi sangat hangat ininya. Sampai nanti ya di sesi